Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to our fourth Equity Advisory Roundtable with the California Transportation Commission. My name is Sequoia Erasmus and I am the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement with the planning team at the California Transportation Commission, and I will be facilitating our meeting today. Before we get started with our agenda items, I'll first turn it over to our interpreters who will provide information on how to access Spanish interpretation services, and then to Justin Hall, who will provide information on closed captioning and American Sign Language services. We would appreciate if all speakers, presenters, and members of the public could speak slowly and clearly so that our interpreters can support our meeting as best as they can.
I'm going to send
Their
you
services.
a draft of the.
And I'll remind everyone on the line to mute themselves, please.
That I got for,
Additionally, Justin will share some tips for using GoToWebinar, including how to provide public comment. Thank you so much to our admin team and translators who are supporting our meeting today. Justin? Is Justin on the line?
I don't
All
believe
right.
Justin is joining us for the meeting today. But we do have Spanish interpretation is available. The numbers should now be on your screen. And if our Spanish interpreters are on the line, if they could please give out that information. I'm not sure, Doug, did you see them on here?
Right.
All right, we'll get back to the Spanish interpreters. Live closed captioning is also available for this meeting. The information and the link to join the closed captioning is located on the CTC's website, and it's under our Equity Advisory Roundtable meeting for October 28th, 2021. The information is located there, and it is a separate system that you would log on to receive that live closed captioning. And Doug, do you have this one here to read?
I do not.
Okay. So this is information for our public comment. If we have any members of the public or attendees, if you guys would like to speak on any agenda items, we ask that you raise your hand or use the questions feature, and you can type your questions in. They'll be read by staff. If you raise your hand, make sure to raise it in advance of that tab number or during the presentation so that we can call on you at the end of it. We don't want to miss anybody. And please do your best to be concise with your comments. And we would like that you add new information to any comments if somebody has already, a previous speaker has already given out the same information. And I don't think we'll need to limit our comments to 1 minute, but we do reserve that right if we are getting a little scrunched on time today. And we could use a timer on screen for our public comments, a 3 or a 1 minute timer, depending on our time frame. And our attendees will not be able to be on camera when you do make those comments. So also keep that in mind. Anything else, Doug, we can add to that?
So no, that was good, but we did find the Spanish interpreter to give the information about that.
Perfect.
Isidra?
Sí, hola, buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a la reunión de la Comisión del Transporte de California. Si ustedes pudieran pasar la pantalla hacia atrás donde estaban los números de teléfono, ok. Tenemos servicio de traducción simultánea en español para esta reunión. Si ustedes desean escuchar la reunión en español, tienen que hacerlo por teléfono marcando al número 1-844-460-1325. Gracias.
All right, Sequoia, I think that's it for us.
Great, thank you. Brandy, will you be holding public comment then?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate the support. Okay, so our next item is our roll call to establish which members are present. And I'll ask Bridget to please call the roll.
Thank you, Sequoia, and good afternoon. I understand we have some roundtable members joining late, but if you are presently on the line, if you could respond when I call your name. I will start with Keith Bergthold. Tamika Butler.
Bridget, Keith is on. I just got him moved over.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Keith. Do you want to test your audio if you are connected? Okay, he might still be getting connected. I can, yeah.
Yeah.
I can.
Sorry,
He can hear you.
I'm more used to Zoom.
No problem. Okay, so Keith is on the line. Next is Tamika Butler. Next, we have Rodney Fong. Naila Popardin.
Present.
Thanks, Naila. Jasmine Leake. I thought I saw Jasmine earlier.
I'm here. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks, Jasmine. Lena Moran Acereta. Rio Oshas. Stephanie Ramirez.
Here.
Thanks, Stephanie. Russell Rawlings. Leslie Sanders.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Thanks, Leslie. Connie Stewart.
Present.
Thanks, Connie. Yvette Torres. Next is Randy Torres Van Black.
He's, they just had a baby, so he just I notified. So congratulations to Randy's family.
Thanks, Sequoia. Kiana Valentine. And Gerard Wright.
Present.
Thank you, Gerard. That is the end of my list. Are there any roundtable members on the line who are present and have not had a chance to chime in yet? Okay, hearing none, I will go ahead and turn it back to Sequoia.
Great, thank you. And thanks to all our roundtable members who were able to join us and who will be joining us later. So next I'll move on to tab 2, welcome and reflections from previous meetings. I'll be joined today by Jeannie Ward-Waller, Caltrans Deputy Director of Planning and Modal Programs, to offer some welcoming remarks and reflections on previous meetings. Before I pass it to her, I'd like to start us off with a moment of reflection and intention for this roundtable meeting. Hi, Jeannie. As I continue my work as the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement with the Commission, I am deeply grateful for the collaboration and support of my team members and our agency partners at Caltrans and the California State Transportation Agency. As we work together to improve equitable transportation outcomes from all of our agencies, the role of the Roundtable members continues to be lifted as a guidepost where we can create opportunities to explore a more equitable approach to connecting with and utilizing the expertise of our statewide equity partners. The past meetings have served as a mirror for us to reflect on our own processes and practices that are rooted in racism and exclusion, and we seek to explore ways to incorporate collaborative engagement practices that are more reflective of equitable practices. The panels and discussions held here continue to shape our interagency equity work by offering insights into ways that we can improve our internal processes and communication, among many other things. I look forward to today's discussion on improving communication between non-governmental organizations and government entities, and I'm really hopeful that these conversations will continue to offer a space to understand issues and create a framework for improved communication and collaboration between all of us. Thank you in advance to the Roundtable members who offer your perspective and expertise. Additionally, I'd like to extend sincere gratitude to Chair Norton, Commissioner Liu, Commissioner Inman, and our other esteemed guests who are in attendance today. Thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to a lively and useful discussion. So with that, I'll pass it on to Jeannie.
Jeannie, you should be good now.
Thanks, Doug. Sorry, I was muted by the organizer. Thank you, Sequoia, and thanks to all the Roundtable members. As always, we're really excited for these conversations, and so appreciate the feedback of the Roundtable from the last meeting, and I think since the last time we met with you all. We definitely heard a lot of feedback on our listening sessions, which we are, just getting going on developing, working with both CalSTA and CTC staff. We got quite a bit of feedback from the commissioners themselves, so really appreciated the chance to have discussion and dialogue and hear from the commission about some of our, initial organizing for the listening sessions and the feedback as well from the Roundtable members. We really appreciate all that input, and we've made some revisions and changes to kind of how we're thinking of scoping those. I think you'll hear more from Amar later during the Caltrans updates on the status of those things, so I won't get into detail, but just really appreciate the open dialogue, and those listening sessions will be just a beginning to a lot more engagement with communities around the state, but we want to really set a good tone with how we're engaging with communities and how we intend to do more of that going forward. I also just want to highlight, we're super excited about the work that we're engaging in to develop a transportation equity index tool, and we've had quite a bit of discussion internally with our executives as well as with our director and chief deputy. We're getting ready in the coming months to start doing some more external engagement on the development of that tool. And I think, again, Amar will give you some more detail on that later in the agenda. We're just continuing to build capacity internally in Caltrans. So out in the districts, we've got a lot of folks engaged in our working groups internally, but definitely trying to do a lot of education and engagement with them. And we hope, that communities will begin to see the fruits of that in working with folks on the agenda. So sorry, I'm in a little bit of a noisy place. Sequoia, I'll keep my comments short and so that we can get into the discussion with the roundtable members, but just, you know, continue to appreciate this space and the open dialogue and just feedback that we can receive from the folks on the roundtable. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks for joining us from your remote location today. And finally, I want to remind everyone that this meeting is open to the public, and we will be taking public comment after each item, after roundtable members have concluded their questions and discussion. All right, so we'll move on to next tab 3, roundtable meeting minutes from the September 16th, 2021 meeting. Bridget, please take it away.
Thanks, Sequoia. During this agenda item, I would like to present the meeting minutes from our September 16th roundtable meeting. These minutes were posted online on October 15th and sent out to roundtable members and stakeholders. At this time, we would like to ask if there are any suggested edits to the September 16th roundtable meeting minutes. First, I would like to check if there are any edits or comments from roundtable members or commissioners. Okay, hearing none. Brandy, do we have any written comments or anyone who has their hand raised?
I do not see any.
Thank you, Brandy. So with that, I will turn it back to Sequoia.
I'll just quickly add, are there any comments from the Spanish line for public comment on this item?
No, no hay comentarios en la línea en español.
Okay, gracias. Okay, so with that, we'll conclude tab 3. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to tab 4, the Equity Advisory Roundtable discussion. So now we'll turn to Stephanie Ramirez, who will moderate the group discussion focused on accountability and effective communication between non-governmental organizations and government agencies in the development of policies, practices, and programs that promote equity. This and future discussions are intended to inform interagency equity initiatives with a focus on improving partnerships, opportunities for internal and external coordination, and effective communication strategies to support the goals of equity experts. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for moderating this discussion, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sequoia. I am really privileged to be able to facilitate this discussion. I know that when we spoke and you had first reached out to me regarding some possible ideas, one of the things that I mentioned to Sequoia is how much I respect the thoughts and perspectives that I think for me, I've already sort of expanded my own perspective and lens in which I see this work. And particularly, I think was pretty, how would I say, I think Rio says it best, you know, that point of where you're hearing things and instead of reacting, you want to take a pause and self-reflect and think about how you are integrating this work, not just at a professional level, but at an individual level. And I think many of the contributions that many of you have already shared have definitely been some of those self-reflective points throughout this year. And I know a little bit when we first got together at the end of, introductions at the end of last year. So with that, I want to jump in. I know that we had requested some discussion questions from Roundtable members, because again, we really want to be able for this process to be inclusive of the knowledge that already exists, and even things that we might as the CTC and Caltrans as staff definitely don't want this to be a top-down process. And so I think I want to acknowledge and thank and appreciate the folks that were able to send the questions, but by no means if the questions that were shared with you in preparation for this discussion, if that's not resonating and you have something else today that speaks to you, by all, please share. And I would encourage you to put those questions in the chat, or if you want to speak up. This is by no means just me. I'm just my role today really is to be the vessel in which we are able to bring out all of your voices, because I think that really is what I see my role in really just elevating the incredible knowledge that you have come to share with us today. And if it doesn't happen today, and maybe something opens for you and you take that moment to reflect tomorrow and within some other days, we'll gladly take that too, because I know that for me that happens sometimes. So, this process, again, as I shared with the CTC Commission, it never ends. It's ever evolving. And so we'll take that in that spirit to start this conversation. So I'm able to see the questions around accountability and effective communication. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so I really wanted to start off with the first bullet. So the question is, have you seen models of accountability that work particularly well? And I think the second part of the question is, who are government agencies accountable to? And again, I know that these questions are very complex, heavy, multiple layers to these, and even understanding the language in which they're posed. And so, yeah, in that spirit, I think any contribution to this will be helpful to inform our next steps to understanding how equity work is integrated within the government agencies that we want to be able to shape in terms of the decision making that happens in around transportation projects across the state. So anybody want to kick us off? And I know I see Gerard on video, and then I'm looking at the chat to see if anybody has taken themselves off of mute.
Well, so at least I'll just get it started, because I'm trying to remember what the first question was, because I don't have the list of any of the questions in front of me, and I don't know if it was shared with everyone else. But all I have is on the website.
How about this? I will include it in the chat for everybody.
Perfect.
And Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind just reading them out, I think that could be helpful for interpretation as well.
Oh, perfect. I can do that as well.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question that we have, which I read, was, have you seen models of accountability that work particularly well? And then the second part to that question is, who are government agencies accountable to? The second question that we received, do you think agencies understand the importance of accountability as opposed to blame? And then the second part to that question is, if not, how can we help them understand is that this body meaning this, the advisory round table, is that this body's job or whose is it? And then the next question is, how can government agencies improve transparency? Another question we received, how does history influence what accountability looks like in the present day? And the example listed was the state of California's relationship with tribal governments. Part of accountability is not only responding to things in the moment, but being continually accountable to past harms and how those actions reverberate forward. Another question, as government agencies make efforts to atone for past harms, what are the best ways to ensure that efforts reflect true allyship and avoid performative actions? I know that one sort of perked my attention, so we'll see how other members feel. And then the last question, also a two-parter, how can advisory committees help improve communication pathways between agencies and non-governmental organizations? And then the second part of that is, what should true partnerships look like? And then let me make sure that I am including this if it hasn't been already included in the chat.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Just,
any thoughts?
I was going to say, the one I'm just using just from my limited experience with, and I think there's always, when there's a fiscal or fiduciary responsibility attached, usually accountability goes with it. I'm just utilizing, the work we did on Measure M and continue to do it in various aspects, because I'm using the LA Metro Board as an example where they have to be accountable to not only themselves, but all the stakeholders that supported the sales tax measure and all the things that are moving forward. And I think they've done, the board as well as the stakeholders, we've all done a great job on that because we were all part of it together. And I think having that understanding early on, like when you're trying to get something passed, it gets something to the voters. And now it's like, okay, that's passed, but now what do we do next? And that's always been consistent through many different organizations. I think that's a great example of it, because you still have to keep, okay, you're going to deliver on what you promised, right? You're going to, there was one area about some pieces around not just equity, but just on streets and active transportation that needed continual follow-up. And that has happened. I think that's a good model to take. And I think we can utilize the SB1. And I think I see that on the agenda maybe as an opportunity where we can really use the resources that we told taxpayers through a gas tax. Hey, this is what we're going to protect. And actually we told them, hey, we want to protect this lockbox of funds so that we can deliver on something. So I think there's an opportunity. There's an example, and then there's an opportunity where both of these can take place. And I'll put myself on mute and let others share it.
Thanks for contributing that, Gerard. So I think the two examples that you shared sort of were these, elementary and just categorizing sort of as these political multi-sector stakeholder coalitions that came together for a specific campaign goal tied to financial resources. So we'll make a note of that. And yeah. Naila, I see you that he popped up on the camera.
Yeah, I don't have like a specific answer for one. I have comments that kind of merged all together. But I think when we talk about accountability, we need to be like really cognizant, and we need to be talking about like how power moves through these systems, because being accountable means like one, like to use the CTC as an example, to acknowledge the power that, the agency has, and who has access to that power. And so I think advisory committees and bodies are really important in helping break down silos and give more people access to power so that they can be accountable. And I think I love the question around accountability versus blame, because I think that can get really mushy, but it's really important to understand that in order that we have to call things to light in order to have conversations about accountability. And we have to really atone for the hurt and damage that our systems and institutions have caused on communities. And so for some communities, it's not going to be enough to just like name it and then move on to solutions, but there does need to be a moment of internalization in our institutions and our structures. So I think it's really important to just pay attention to power, where it shows up, who has it, who has access. I think in situations where accountability has felt the most authentic is when it's built in from the beginning, when there's regular check-ins, when it doesn't include like communities that are harmed having to actually seek out the institution or agency and then like, you know, and then call them out. Accountability means that there's like progress reports implemented, that there's like regular check-ins, that there's some type of a relationship built. Like to me, that shows like really moving forward with being accountable and like creating effective relationships. So I'll end there. I have a few more thoughts that I'll let other folks talk and I'll pop on maybe later.
Okay, great. I mean, I think again, and also I loved what Naila did because I think she, you know, sort of shared her thoughts across these questions, so we don't have to specifically stick to one in particular. But I definitely took note on being able to identify the power dynamics that are happening, right? We have talked a lot about that, and other members have talked about the specific power relationships, power and privilege, the systemic oppression in which we exist, and a lot of the decision-making power that is held, whether it's, you know, for organizations and entities. And so I think that definitely is something that should inform these mechanisms around accountability. And then, Naila, thank you so much for sharing sort of, I think, what I also took from your remarks is being able to, you know, give sort of these bigger picture conversations that also, you know, you shared, like some groups are ready to have them and others are not, but also how do you move to these like tangible ways in which you demonstrate accountability as a government agency, and that's which is like this authentic relationship building, right? Checking in, not having people come to you, but you come to them. And so there is an authenticity in the relationship building that is trying to take place. And, you know, how whatever project, program you're trying to move forward, how community really is at the center of it. And so hopefully, I think that definitely is something that we should keep paying attention to. So I don't see anyone on video. Anyone else wants to add their thoughts or take it to some other questions?
Hi, can you all hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, Jasmine, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm just listening in, and I think you know, I think that this is a great start to this conversation, but I want to just agree that with some of the comments made that this is just really the beginning of a much longer series of conversations, and I think what time will tell, you know, through actions. And I think that that's the biggest thing here is for community members on the ground. you know, these processes are great, but the action and the follow-up is really crucial. And I think that that's what folks are going to be paying attention to. So yeah, I wish I could offer more at this moment, but I just think, you know, that all these things have to be met with action. And yeah, I just appreciate that we're having the conversation. So pause
Yeah,
there.
no, I love it. I see your comments as the gut check, right? Like, so yeah, this is all in great. How does it really look like and manifest in real life, right? And understanding that for community members, if we're, you know, able to present this like plan, look, we've held, you know, numerous conversations about accountability, and these are all the strategies that we identified, and this is what we came up with. But what are the actions to be able to not just implement that plan or set plan, which I know sometimes doesn't happen within the political realities and other again, that the power dynamics that happen within governmental agencies and community. But you know, how do we keep true to this promise, right? This commitment, that accountability, that we said we were going to do this because we are committed to rectifying harm, or we're committed to lifting community voices on a specific project or program. And so making sure that that transparency is there, but also, like you said, like the action needs to be there as well. So I think your contribution was definitely valuable. Anyone else?
And then I'll just also say that, you know, I think one other thing that's coming to mind just reading through these the questions is I think the state, and I feel like we've said this before in other meetings, you know, the state has a real opportunity to work with local governments, and I know they don't like to do that, or they don't like to tell local governments how things should be done, but I think that's where the rubber really meets the road in communities. And for example, I'll give a perfect example. Well, I think it's a perfect example. You know, there are local transit agencies implementing projects on the ground that have really significant negative impacts. There are good impacts, but there are some that are really negative, or they're really missing the big opportunity, I guess, to do things more equitably. And the funding source doesn't require that they go above and beyond to meet those equity goals. It doesn't require that they work with local community partners or go above and beyond in the public process, or like community outreach or public outreach process. And I think that's where that distrust really lies, is it's one thing for the state and the state agencies to say this is the direction we're going, but if local agencies aren't also on board, you know, there's just people on the ground don't see the difference between a state agency and their local city government. And so I just want to make sure that that point isn't lost, that the state really has an opportunity to show leadership and put those kinds of, and kind of create, be a bridge, I guess, for the work that happens on the ground to take place in a more equitable way. Those are my thoughts.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know that I've had really frustrating talks as well in my transportation advocacy efforts when we're talking, and this is, you know, I think my experience has been more county government to local, and, you know, county coming up with a great initiative on how to move transportation equity projects and funding, and then, you know, the challenge really is this opposition from local governments, and there isn't the leadership, as you mentioned, to, you know, to see this commitment and project through, where now, you know, we make exceptions, or we turn the other way, or there's like, you know, the background political wheeling and dealing. I think going back to Naila's comment about power, where, who has the power and who doesn't, that community members don't sometimes they're not even aware that happens, but also, when it comes back to this specific project having a public comment, component, and it's kind of like a done deal because, the decision making took place in a place that is not in a public meeting. And so thank you for highlighting that. All right. So I think in particular, we've had some thoughts around, and I'm just pulling up the questions around, government agencies improving transparency. How does history influence accountability? So I think part of it is, what in terms of what was shared around, these plans. We make these great plans, but no action is followed, or only like a certain period, and then the community doesn't hear from you, and then the community has to seek the government agencies to hold them accountable. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this question around, as government agencies make efforts to atone for past harms, what are the best ways to ensure that efforts reflect true allyship and avoid performative actions? And I think, that we're living, I think we've seen a lot of, at least I've seen a lot of performative actions. I think about as an individual, right? Particularly in the last year, as you saw some of the racial uprisings, and whether people took to their social media to put up a black box on their accounts, or thinking about all the different ways that that I saw signs around my neighborhood about we love inclusivity, and we are open arms to all kinds of different people. But when I think about specifically the policies that are on the books to make that inclusivity and the safety of individuals that we said are in harm's way, that actually isn't the story, right? And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. Any thoughts? How about, and then I'm trying to, Paul or Randy? And I'm just trying to, this is not by any means like a call out of folks. I just want to make sure that we all can participate if we want to. We want to be able to have as many people to hear from different people, and also understanding that at this moment you might be having some trouble with Wi-Fi or life or whatnot, but being able to hear as many people as possible today, knowing that we have more conversation and time to dedicate to this. Hi, Gerard.
Hey, just to give others a chance to kind of get their audio and internet, or at least the screens together. Just on that particular question, I think a lot of it's just a relationship building. A lot of it is just, starting those conversations, continuing those conversations, whether they be virtual, whether they're in person. But I think a lot of that can start the process of healing. It starts the process of understanding, okay, where they're coming from and seeing different sides. I can remember, at one point I go to a meeting with one conception and I'll be blown away hearing from everyone who has the exact opposite and just hearing their stories as to why. And you realize, maybe they do have a point there. And it's just putting that understanding in context to the bigger goal of equity, of inclusion. A lot of that inclusion is also just including other ideas that you might not have thought of before. And I think a lot of it is just, again, just having those conversations. Again, this is the start, but I really feel, and I'm kind of going back to SB1 as an example, like that can be a great utilization of how we can move forward on and show some achievable goals with some of these pieces. Like, we have something already. Let's see if that's a test bed to really put in, like integrating a lot of local cities, talking to the city manager, say, hey, what are you guys thinking? Because we're thinking this. Let's collaborate better together so that one hand, we don't come back and say, oh, we want to have a wider road right here. It's like, wait a minute, we want to put a bike lane right here because this is kind of the migratory pattern and all that other stuff. So you don't have that level of, and we're seeing it in housing. I'm just wearing my government affairs realtor hat. Like, we're seeing this in housing too, where the state's saying one thing and then you go down to the local level, they're always saying local control, local control. A lot of that is locals and the state, they're talking, but they're talking past each other, not to each other. And I think this is an opportunity to talk to each other here. And then it looks like Randy has a comment.
Thanks, Gerard. Hey, Randy.
Hey, Stephanie. Thank you so much for facilitating this important dialogue. Sorry, everyone. I joined the whole meeting 15 minutes late. I just had a baby 2.5 weeks ago. So I just came from a doctor's appointment.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I just moved my laptop outside. So I heard you called me in to the convo. So appreciate that, and really again values this opportunity that we have. Super important and essential, I think, to a large part of what I believe the Roundtable can help think through is, again, how can we improve accountability between government and community. And I did speak about it last time during the panel, but I do see a lot of value in the model that we've implemented in San Diego at Sandag with the community-based organizations playing multiple roles in the planning process and accountability process. Not only are they being funded to do outreach and engagement, but we're also funded to sit at that policy table, the social equity working group, where we're weighing in on ideas and we're crafting ideas for projects and policies and plans before they're developed and down the road. Because oftentimes we've seen, I think, a little bit of the agency top-down approach has been that the staff will generate planning materials and concepts, and then they'll ask for input when they're already halfway through developing what it is that they're recommending. So I think that being aware of when it is that community members and community CBOs are involved in a meaningful way along the timeline is critical as well. But yeah, there's so much to discuss here. Those are some big ideas that came to my mind just based on the questions that you posed, Stephanie. And yeah, thanks again for facilitating this.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks for jumping in the convo. I think definitely some of the mechanisms that you shared, I know that this has been echoed a lot just through our conversation, like including, community members way before in these planning processes, not in the middle of processes as you're going through them, and being able to understand that. So that's really coming top to mind in this, and so really appreciate you adding to those thoughts. I also wanted to welcome not just our roundtable members, but I know that some of the CTC commissioners are on the call. And so I also would invite you all to share your thoughts on some of these. I mean, you know, we are discussing the relationship and dynamics of power. You commissioners wield some power within these structures of government. And so I would definitely want to hear your thoughts as, you know, as a roundtable. You're an advisory roundtable. We want to be able to, you know, give you our thoughts and recommendations, but I also hear from you around some of these very complex, you know, issues, but also sort of understanding your role in this as well.
I'm happy to jump in if our chair isn't doing so at this point. I saw her name in the box there.
Yeah, Commissioner Liu.
I'm Joe Liu. I think the first thing I would start off with is, you know, I'm one of 11 votes that count. So not all power resides in any individual, and that's an important thing. You know, it's an honor to serve on the commission. It's a huge responsibility. I think that one thing to remember is that the commissioners have an enormous amount of dedication to this issue because it takes a lot of work and you get virtually no compensation. And you're also as good as the amount of work you put into it. And so you have to go into it knowing what that's going to take. I am in perhaps a unique situation in that I have spent more than 30 years as an air quality and environmental justice advocate. And so I have been on both sides of the dais for much of my career. You know, I have experienced the frustration of engaging with agencies that are non-responsive and unaccountable. And one of the things that has been so great about serving on CTC and in partnership with the California State Transportation Agency and Caltrans is this opportunity that we have to make true progress on transportation equity issues. So I really do look forward to this. I think I'm never going to be happy with the pace of progress. I think we're moving way too slow. I would like us to start getting to some real tasks and real specifics as to, you know, how we're going to actually hold ourselves accountable. We've had some progress. These roundtable sessions are progress. The upcoming listening sessions are progress. We're going to hear about the equity index work today, which is important. Obviously, the statements on transportation equity and that have come out of all three of the state entities have been important to show a commitment to this issue. So I think, you know, all of this is part of that complex web of accountability. And I encourage everyone to let us know how best to do this because no one has the exact answer here. And I see that our chair has joined us, so I will defer to her at this point. Thank you, Stephanie.
Commissioner Liu.
Well, I just wanted to say, Stephanie, and thank you, Commissioner Liu. I was on. I'm having some real audio difficulties, though, with my connection, so I'm sorry. It took me a little bit. But as someone who worked in South LA and in East Los Angeles and in the Northeast Valley, where there were a lot of concerns about equity and investment, I think that one of the things that I've been excited about as a commissioner and as chair is that we are spending a lot of time on the ground talking to people about the projects and the accessibility of projects. And I think you'll see as the CTC staff, especially with active transportation programs, with the expansion of complete streets, with SHOP projects for highways, that and our focus, just even this last meeting on equity and tolling, there's been a real effort to signal in the project development phase how we want to see each project resonate with communities. I think we've done a really extraordinary job, especially these last 2 years when I've been on the commission, to talk about where's money going, what kind of equity are we getting, how is this funding transit, what are we doing to expand these opportunities. And I think in the last meeting where we asked for an additional $2 billion in active transportation program money and in transit funding for the STIP, $2.5 billion for the STIP. I think what's been helpful is being able to say that's just the funding, and here are monies that don't have these long lead times, but can actually start being inspiring to projects and to project developers. So we can look at bike highways, we can look at some larger pedestrian safety projects, things that have been talked about here in the equity roundtables, because we really want to be able to incentivize really good project development and to talk about good project development so that when it gets to us a year later and we're funding it, that it really is reflective of everything we're hearing here in the roundtables. And the same is true of trying to open up access to have people in the roundtable and more community members. And I think this has been helped by our being able to have these meetings virtually to give input as to how to make projects better and to ensure that when projects are coming up for funding, that they are highlighting how they're multimodal, how they are serving communities equitably. And I think the other thing that I have found that I've learned as a commissioner is how great the staff are at CTC and at Caltrans in helping to identify where money is spent, how it's spent, so that we can keep tracking that funding and looking at equity and looking at parity and reparations in funding where the need is. And so I think that this is an opportunity for us to continue to look at giving those powerful tools to everyone here in the roundtable and in the community to show how these projects are actually working, and to then get feedback as, was this built the way they told the community that it was going to be built? Is this going to be a project that is meeting the needs of the community as you hoped? And where can we highlight where projects are really working and serving equity, and how to make that in our opportunity to speak around the state, how we can make those projects that you see as most important in addressing equity as the kinds of projects we show to every other agency all throughout Caltrans, all throughout the applying agencies, to say, do more of this and make sure that the communities that you're working with, that you can show this to them and find out whether this is what they want or something different, and that partnership can ensue. And I know the new Caltrans directors are seeing that happen more and more. Those partnerships are happening, and I'm pleased to see so many people on the Equity Roundtable spearheading a lot of those conversations and looking at making projects address CAPDI goals and working with us to take advantage of some of the funding opportunities we're asking for that have less restrictions and can be put on the street more quickly.
Thank you, Chair Norton. I think that was great insight to, I think, one of the aspects of, being fiduciary stewards and looking for those opportunities to be able to leverage and bring more resources to this work. And again, sort of being accountable for the projects that Caltrans and the agencies and different departments involved into bringing those projects to communities in hearing community voices in that process. So I see some folks jumped in. Thank you to Chairwoman Norton and Commissioner Liu for sharing your thoughts with us today. Let's go to Jasmine, Naila, and I don't know, Randy, you popped up, so I don't know if you also want to make additional thoughts. So we'll go in that order.
Can you all hear me? Sorry, I made a technology switch in the middle, so that's saying thanks for giving me grace on that.
Absolutely. You went to your phone?
I was on my iPad and I just switched to my computer, so
Oh, okay.
I can actually be on camera and everything now. I was just having some issues. Excuse me one moment.
No worries.
For me, that's coming up for me, you know, on this note about being the kind of what criteria or ways the CTC can get ahead of some of these issues. I think I just want to take this opportunity to share some of the things that I've seen, some of the experiences that we've had, because I don't necessarily have the answer of what the CTC can do. I don't work there. That's not my wheelhouse. So, but I will say, like, there's a couple of experiences that I want to share, if I may, about, you know, locally funded projects. For example, there's a major capital project taking place in downtown Stockton, and it's requiring collaboration with the rail lines. I don't know if it's a UP line or a BNSF line, but the project itself is designed to create a flyover that is going to have good impacts on air quality and reduce idling of trains in the downtown area. But during the construction phase, it's been communicated to community members that, you know, the process for, you know, the other unfortunate thing about where this project is located is there's a lot of unsheltered community members in the surrounding area. And it was communicated to us by the project lead that their protocol in partnership with the privately owned rail line would be to, their first step would be to involve law enforcement if there was a breach or if there were any issues. And I think that that's just one example of ways where we need to build better systems for addressing these kinds of challenges. We know that these challenges are real. We can't avoid them, obviously. But, you know, if there are relationships or if the project leads are willing to work with community members or organizations that have the experience and have the trust with our unsheltered communities, they can and is willing to, like, set up temporary transitional spaces or some sort of, like, intermediary, you know, way where they can clear folks from the area and keep people safe, rather than going to law enforcement, which we know has negative impacts and often causes more harm than good. And that's just one example of things that we're seeing where there's absolutely no consideration of working with the local community groups to try to find other alternative solutions. And it just, you know, ultimately ends up creating a lot of mistrust. And I will say, you know, as far as, like, working with our Caltrans, you know, local district office, there have been a lot of improvements recently. I think we're District 10. You know, from things I'm hearing on the ground from other community partners, there is a lot of opportunity, and we're on a more hopeful path. But there's still a lot of other smaller agencies that have a hand in the work and implementing that. There's just a lot of harms being done or missed opportunities to do better. So,
thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, I think you've kind of really highlighted some of the adverse effects, right, of these of decisions being made without this lens of understanding, you know, how these projects affect maybe just, you know, stakeholders that we're not even being aware of, right? That doesn't even come to mind because the ways that we design things, right, are not accessible, or like purposely leave out this these populations. And I even think about one of the things that always that I'm reminded when we talk about this work is that not everyone is coming to a public meeting because they want to talk about a transportation project. We have to have the understanding that a lot of the basic needs and just basic dignity and humanity of people in our state are not being met. And also just even the recognition that we are human beings to begin with, and that's not also recognized. And so, you have these outcomes where we are putting people in harm. We can, I think, continue to leave people in harm and in these situations of compacted trauma. And so thank you for bringing that up. Naila, Randy, and Tamika.
Thank you. So I've veered away a little bit from the prompts. I honestly don't even remember where we started with the prompts. But some of the thoughts that I had from the conversation is, I think it's really hard for me to frame this, like to hold this conversation in my mind, because one, we're talking about the way that like engagement happens now and advocacy happens now at the CTC is a reactive model where things happen and then communities have to react and advocates have to react. And I think we have the opportunity with things like an equity advisory committee to move to a proactive model where we're looking to the future. And so I think the equity advisory committee in my head is somewhere where I can see where we're looking to the future, where we're really shaping like the way decisions are made. And I see like, I mean, in a perfect world, right? As we move into like an all electric future and we move into like promoting more climate friendly, I really see like more committees that can specialize and really think deeply about some of the issues in a proactive way and offer advice and expertise to the commissioners. I mean, it's 11 commissioners that are making really big decisions. And I won't speak for them, but I know for me, I'm a type of person who thinks more information is never a bad thing. And so I think it's really important to have like these type of committees that can think deeply about issues and offer some type of expertise. And we have to find a way to uphold them. In the meantime, while we're thinking about what the future holds, we do have to hold space for the reactive nature, for communities that are having immediate harm done to them, or communities that have past harm that want to rectify that. So like tangible things that we can offer like immediately are just democratizing the language we use in these meetings and not throwing out the full alphabet soup. I mean, at the heart of this, we're talking about mobility. We're talking about getting people from point A to point B. And there's no reason why we have to use the full alphabet soup of programs to do that. Like there's a way to make meetings more accessible. There's a way to make giving input more accessible. There's also a way in terms of accountability to when people do bring concerns, offering things like red line documents to show like, this is what it used to look like. Then you came, you said something, and this is how we changed it, to be able to give like alternatives. I think those are really important in terms of building trust where people can see like, oh, my input has actually been implemented. Because while I think in many ways the CTC has transitioned in like good faith, done a lot to like implement things that folks are, coming to them about, there actually hasn't been a lot around like actually publicizing that and like celebrating wins together. They're saying like, oh, this group helped us shift, which I think helps build power, helps build relationships amongst advocacy groups and some of our agencies. And not just CTC that I'm harping on, but Caltrans as well, and CalSTA as well. I think there's a lot of room. And then I think also in project development and in our guidelines process, there's this we know what we want and what we need, and we don't need to overwrite and overprescribe guidelines, waiting for like applications to just put the magic words in. I don't know if this is making any sense, but like, it's almost like we're we know the projects, we know what active transportation should look like, we know the disadvantaged communities, and not in a way that is patriarchal or patronizing, but it should just be easier for those communities to have access to the type of infrastructure that's going to make their communities better, without making them hop through hoops, without making them have to have the most beautiful or shiny application. Like, there just needs to be ways that we're streamlining communities' access to what they actually need. So I will end there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that, and I think, you know, it's interesting that you know, going back to like what are the original prompts. It's funny because I also am more of a Zoom utilizer, and so I keep posting the questions in the chat, but I keep sending them to Sequoia. So sorry, Sequoia, that you're just getting inundated with the same bullet points, but I hopefully did include them. I know that some members and actually members of the public are also engaged in this conversation. So thank you, Naila, for your additional comments. I loved what you said in terms of, you know, and I think it goes back to the first question of, have you seen models of accountability that work particularly well? And, you know, you able to say, hey, we're, you know, the structure that we're clearly operating is designed to be more reactive than proactive. This is what I look at to envision as we're building power with community, and not just sort of the top-down approach that we're also thinking. And I did also noted the comment that you made around holding, I think for me, I see it as a, you know, who's responsible for accountability and whether it's this body or not. But I think that, you know, you thinking about how this advisory table and particularly the expertise that could be honed in to offer, you know, to offer advice and thinking about transportation and equity and, you know, climate change and all these things to commissioners of like, how do you delve deeper as opposed to these like generalized bodies of advisory members. I think that is also something that for me was really interesting. I did see a chat question, and this is, I'll pose this to Sequoia. We have a member, is this agenda item part of public comment? I know that I saw that, so I just wanted to make sure that
yes, it is.
that I'm okay, great. And how much more time do we have? Just want to make sure that I also give
about 15 minutes
enough time.
would be ideal.
Okay.
But we'll take the time
Great.
that we need.
Okay, thank you. Randy? And then we'll
Sure,
go to
thanks.
Tamika.
Do you mind if I offer a specific example of a project in San Diego that I think could really have benefited from like more meaningful community engagement throughout the whole process? Excellent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would help too. 'Cause I know that you know, these kind of projects are something that goes before the CTC often. So this was the 94 Express Lanes project in San Diego that ran through Southeast San Diego, City Heights, Golden Hill, Sherman Heights, and like Barrio Logan area in San Diego. And when it was rolled out to the public in 2012, the alternatives that were publicly announced and available for input, the alternatives were narrowed down to two alternatives, and then the no build. So, and both alternatives were basically the same. They were two freeway expansion projects with an HOV lane down the middle, and the only difference was one had a major flyover bridge, and the other one had a partially elevated flyover bridge. And so we were asked to provide input on that. There was a process that had no community engagement at all. That was all kind of done privately, I guess you could say, or without public consultations, probably a better way to say it. But that was in 2008, and the agencies had 26 alternatives that they analyzed, including transit-only alternatives. And that whole process of analyzing the alternatives, generating the alternatives, selecting the two that would move forward, not done with any public engagement at all. So that was a major issue for our communities when we started to dig more into this. And eventually we launched a big campaign with Environmental Health Coalition, City 8 CDC, a bunch of organizations in the area. And we did our own community-led planning process for what residents wanted the 94 corridor to look like. And we got consensus from a lot of leaders on that. And we ended up building up the political support for a community-supported alternative that actually included transit stations along the way, not just a project that the transit would be passing through the community. But we got a lot of victories, including a bus on shoulder pilot that's going to be opening up in January. But the whole process, we learned a lot about like when and where and how community involvement should take place. Just to recap, involve community members meaningfully in the alternatives development process, not just when the two top ones have been developed. This is on a project level, like corridor planning process. The project needs statement was something that had never really had public engagement before, and so we had to kind of like pull the thread on that and say, hey, we want to weigh in and define what the project need is here, because climate's not is not part of the project need, equity is not part of the project need, community connectivity is not identified in there, so involving the public in the project need part. And then lastly, I'd say that one phase that gets overlooked a lot for community involvement is the design phase. And that's where like I found that that's where a lot of decisions are made about what specifically the project will look like. That's where the decisions are made about whether the intersection will have 4 crosswalk legs or 2. And those are important conversations for community members to weigh in on. So I just offer that as a specific example. Luckily, we turned the corner on the whole 94, and we have a really, I think, community-supported, transit-oriented plan moving forward. And now Sandag is doing they have a new approach for the work now. They're doing a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan, where it's a little bit more holistic, and they're involving community members early on. So yeah, I just wanted to offer that. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah, I think that is, for me, a very tangible way to really look at, you know, this framework, right? And I love that you offered that, because it's like, okay, there's so many wins that we had, and congratulations on those wins. Again, talking, I think Jasmine talked about, Naila said how we, you know, celebrate the good work that is doing. So congrats to you and your colleagues and community members. But I also think bringing in those examples of like what didn't work, I think for me, and I hope for other members, it spurs additional things that we can bring up to this discussion moving forward. But again, how to inform the work that the CTC and other agencies are doing. So I want to go to Tamika, Gerard, and Jasmine, and hopefully we can fit in with the allotted time that we have. So thank you, everyone. Tamika, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks for expertly facilitating this conversation. It's a lot to keep it all in one container. So I just want to go back to what my colleague Naila was talking about, which is this idea that if we really want accountability, folks have to know what we're doing. And I think too often the way community advisories or community engagement work is that we go out and ask people something, and we can have a long conversation about the way those meetings are structured and if it works and if it goes well. But at the end of the day, there's no connection between feedback and information and suggestions that people give us, and there's not that loop of what we've actually done with that information, then that's where we start to really tear down the very then trust we already, don't have. Because folks feel like, well, I just went to this meeting, I spent all this time, I was on all this webinar, I waited for my public comment, and then there's no, what happened with that information, what's going to happen next. And I think if you're working specifically in community, we need to start building into our timelines when we're going to go back, when we're going to say what happens. I think if it's something like this, a webinar or council meeting, I think folks need to come to that meeting prepared to say, here's what we're doing today, and here's what we're going to do with that information. And here's where you're going to find what we did with your information after this meeting. And so I think, we can all sit around and say accountability, 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 but folks can't hold us accountable if they don't know what we're doing. And I think that's why accountability and transparency have to go hand in hand. because you can't just do one and think that you're gonna make the impact that you're gonna make. And then, you know, the only other thing I'll say is the processes I've seen go the best, which I think are hardest for government, are when you're open to the idea that your solution may not be the one the community wants. And frankly, your assertion of the problem may not be the problem. And I think that's really hard. And you know, I don't blame our hardworking civil servants for that. The process to get to the point where they can put forth their solution is that they've had to, like, you know, study and do research and then put together a grant and then get the grant and then go through this like complicated government training from the other source, right? A state is getting federal money for how you, like, you know, a locality is getting money from the state. So there's all this process, and by the time we're often in front of community with the solution, we've already had to jump through so many hoops, and by we I mean government has already had to jump through so many hoops just to get that money, and then they feel like they have to spend that money because they did talk to people at the beginning of the process, but how many years ago was that? And so now they're coming in saying we're here to fix this problem, and the community is like, but who said that was a problem? That's not the problem. That's my biggest priority. And I think we, like, with the acknowledgement that like the systems are built for it to be this way, I still think government needs to get creative. They need to be better about figuring out how to be open to the idea that what they think needs to happen might not be the solution, might not be the answer, might not be the process. And it can't be, there's that question about blame. I think too often what we hear in community is, well, here's why we have to do it that way. And I think they have to understand that, like, building trust is important. So when you can't do something, you got to say it. Here's why we can't do this. Here's why this won't work. Here's what's going on. And like, guess what? We take responsibility for that. We take responsibility that this is a broken system and that this is going to be not at all satisfying, but this can't happen. That's very different than what we often hear. Well, people didn't show up to our meetings. Well, it's not our fault. It's these people who did it, or these people who did it. And I think we have to get out of this place of blame and get to a place of transparency, accountability, and kind of this collaborative relationship of open communication where you are open to the fact that what you think might not be the answer.
I'm like, yes. And I think we've had other members agree with your comments, Tamika. And again, I think going into that question of best practices, I think you are also adding to this body of, like, you know, what we do might be working for us right now, but it's not the best solution. And I also think that what you've highlighted in terms of when we go back to community members, yeah, it is this very cumbersome, bureaucratic, long process. And it goes back to, like, you know, when you give people options, are they really options if they don't really have a choice? And so it's, you know, going back to that, like, what are you reimagining with community members when it's like you're not coming with that picture already in your mind of what it needs to look like. So definitely, I think, coincides, I think, with some opportunities that the CTT and other agencies have with the community listening sessions that are happening right now. So that could be something, again, that there's an opportunity for that reimagining. So thank you for sharing that. Jasmine, and then Gerard.
Okay, I thought it was, okay, I'll wait till the end.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gerard. You're right. It's you, and then Jasmine. Okay. Thanks for holding me accountable.
No problem. It was a question more for Randy because I put it in the chat box in terms of, on that great example in San Diego, when did you all get started in the process? Was it right at the very beginning, or was it somewhere near the middle? Because there's this idea that, oh, if we don't start right at the very beginning, it can never get done. I think we need to get, part of it on the accountability is get out of that mindset of, okay, it's the chips already said we can't do anything. No, there's always an opportunity. So can you speak on when your group got started and how did that build the momentum to get to that next stage?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I'd say that we got really engaged in the middle of the project and the process. But we were actually early from a public standpoint because the alternatives development concept did not have any public consultation. So we were involved the middle point when it went from 26 alternatives to 2 plus the no build alternative. And we really organized around, promoted this idea and got elected officials on board that we need more alternatives on the table here. And so the draft EAR was close to being released, which we were concerned, and that would have kind of locked us in with these 2 alternatives. And at that point, our comment would have just been like a comment on a draft EAR, but really we want to be involved in the conceptual alternative development process where we're talking about bus only lane stations in the middle, maybe alternatives. So yeah, I'd say it was in the middle, but early as we could get realistically.
Okay, no, that's great because that's why I thought I heard it in your presentation, like there was one process and it went through this phase and then you guys got in kind of right in that middle, because I think it's great to see that it's a great success story that even if it starts early on and you're catching it midstream, you can still get in the process and still make some changes and really make some great things happen. So that's kudos to you and your team on that. I was just going to make one final comment, and that was just kind of going back to the whole Friends for Expo days when I was with a bunch of community members. And we, at the time, it was, the Expo line was going to be a busway in the mid-90s because A, that's all they could afford, and B, that's what the leadership thought, oh, that's all, the folks want because you can't build any rail anywhere. A lot of the communities all got together, banded together. It was, it's called Friends for Expo. Coalition of neighbors essentially all got together and say, hey, we want this line, we want this built on this right of way, and it got in midstream, but it was an important part of a 20 plus year process that finally got the line built in 2016. But it was the point of, it doesn't matter where you start as long as you start and you build the necessary partners together, build those relationships to where you're really going to see equity, inclusion, and the community really see the benefit of that participation, because I really feel that's the sweet magic that can occur through this. And I think this conversation is a great part of that. And the next step will be the implementation. But, great job again, Stephanie, for moderating this conversation.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your contributions, everyone that contributed. Again, I'll remind you if there's something that you weren't able to share, and I'll do like a last call right now for folks, whether it's our roundtable members or commissioners, that if anybody has just, burning thoughts that you want to share, but we could also share them I would imagine through email or other channels with Sequoia. And thank you, Sequoia, for helping, I think, build this session. I told Sequoia I was particularly happy to see the way that this advisory body is utilizing folks, and we're hearing from members. I have participated in advisory boards before where we just have people come and talk to you, and you're seeing as experts, but we actually don't even get to hear from one another. So thank you all for being able to contribute. And again, if you didn't, you still be able to, because I think one of the things that we got away from this is this conversation is not stopping. It's a process that continues, and then being able, I think, to be transparent. I think one of the things that I'm walking away with, which to me was one of the biggest takeaways, but you can't talk about accountability if you're not letting folks know what you're being held accountable for. And that's, again, thank you, Tamika, going hand in hand with transparency, and also Naila, being able to envision something different, that, we're talking about best practices, but again, sort of in these models that are not really forward thinking. And so how do we look into the future as we are making remarkable strides in not just transportation, but in other sectors. So thank you, everyone, and I'll turn it over to Sequoia.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone who's been able to offer their feedback and thoughts and for a really great discussion. And I know that some folks are having technical difficulties, so I look forward to hearing their comments in other ways, written or otherwise. So again, thank you, Stephanie. And I'll turn it over to Justin. It sounds like we have public comment on this item.
Thank you, Sequoia. We do have one attendee looking to make public comment at this time. We have Angela Logan. Angela, you are unmuted and free to make your comment.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the CTC for taking on this huge initiative, which is very difficult and complex to address. And I want to thank the Roundtable members as well for taking this on and your commitment towards this. I wanted to comment, I think one of the Roundtable members mentioned the issue around locomotives and trains in Fresno, and it raised an issue that I think that the Roundtable and CTC should really think about in terms of their providing resources and supporting private entities like Class 1 railroads and or port complexes and our other facilities that help to support goods movement, in that when we're talking about accountability and effective communication between agencies and non-governmental organizations, one of the things that's important to consider is to ensure that these private entities like Class 1 railroads operate and developing a standard in which they can operate within. And so some of the comments that were made by the Roundtable members, I think, were really important. When these private entities, their bread and butter really is transportation, and they're receiving public dollars, they should be required to operate within a standard, and those standards should have equity and environmental justice components within that. And so I think that I would like to recommend the Roundtable really think about when the public dollars are going to private entities like the Class 1 railroads, that that they should operate within these standards that are developed that include equity and environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments or comments on the Spanish line?
No hay comentarios en la línea de español.
Gracias. Okay. Yes.
I have a comment, and that was that I just wanted to say that even while we were talking, when you talked about how we could have real dialogue and look at how we're going to actually account for things that we've learned in these meetings, I want you to know that we have learned about creating some glossaries and doing some things so that we're not talking about the alphabet soup that Naila was talking about and so many of you referred to. And I think it's going to help all of us. We're going to look at addressing that alphabet soup problem so that we can help identify the programs we're working with in real people's conversation. And so I just wanted to speak to how productive these meetings are and how much we're listening. And even when we're off camera, a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that we're absorbing and doing something about. So at our December meeting, you will see something different about how we do our meetings and how we have our programs accessible to the public so that we no longer speak in acronyms, but we give people that accessibility. And so I just wanted, as you pointed out, to give you in real time understanding about how you are making us better. And I want to thank you for that.
Thanks, Chair Norton. And that reminds me, if any other commissioners have any final questions or comments on this really useful discussion. Okay, seeing that there are none, we can go ahead and wrap up tab 4, and we'll take a short 5-minute break and return at 2:43 in 5 minutes. Thanks again to all the Roundtable members for participating, and I look forward to ongoing discussions with you all on this and related topics. All right, thank you so much. reconvene the roundtable meeting at this time. Thanks, everyone. Up next, we'll have a short presentation for tab 5. I'll be joined by Avital Barnier, Deputy Secretary for Transportation Planning at the California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, and Amar Sid, Program Manager for the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans, the Office of Race and Equity. The purpose of this agenda item is to discuss future opportunities for involvement in interagency equity initiatives. The Commission, Caltrans, and CalSTA staff seek to gauge interest in the availability of roundtable members to support future brainstorming efforts related to the development of an equity advisory committee or committees, guidelines development, and Caltrans equity and engagement initiatives. I'll add that the Equity Advisory Roundtable Charter identifies several topics that the Roundtable may provide advice on, and they include incorporating best practices for meaningful engagement with residents, community-based organizations, and tribal governments into the Commission's meetings and program and planning guidelines, improving pathways for residents, community-based organizations, and tribal governments to participate in and influence transportation planning and decision-making processes, supporting the development of the forthcoming statewide community listening sessions that the Commission will hold in partnership with Caltrans and CalSTA, and again, the development of an equity advisory committee. This short presentation builds on our interagency slideshow that we presented to the roundtable at the last meeting, and we seek to kind of extend an offer for volunteering. So I will now turn it to Avital. Thanks, Avital.
Thanks, Sequoia. Hi, everybody. So as Sequoia mentioned during the last roundtable meeting, and as you'll see in the slides that were attached to this agenda item on the website, we talked about how CalSTA released the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, as we call it for short. And then the CAPTI was subsequently adopted by the CTC. So this Climate Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, it's a holistic framework to leverage state transportation spending, programming, and policy making with our climate, health, and social equity goals. And it includes a suite of proposed actions, but as you are familiar with, one of those actions is establishing a Transportation Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. And what the CAPTI document says that committee will assist with is creating a more transparent transportation planning process, coordinating across state agencies to develop standards and practices for meaningful public engagement, and also things like providing technical assistance resources to those most impacted by projects, which includes disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and BIPOC communities. So we've been given this charge, and at CalSTA, we've been working closely with CTC and Caltrans staff. Amar and Sequoia and I have all been working closely to develop the structure of this Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. And one of the things that we're keeping top of mind is that this committee will build off of and be informed by the Equity Advisory Roundtable that you are all participating in right now. The CAPTI Equity Advisory Committee will also build off of the statewide community listening sessions, which I think Amar will speak a little bit more about later. But yeah, we're definitely working on how this roundtable effort will inform the CAPTI Equity Advisory Committee. So we're still working out those details, and we certainly welcome your ideas on that, on how to structure the committee. And also, once the application period opens, which it hasn't yet, we're still working all of that out. But we would love, once the application period does open, to have you apply for participation and to become a member of that CAPTI Equity Advisory Committee. So definitely happy to hear your thoughts and ideas on that committee and would love to have you continue your participation with the state on the Cacti Equity Advisory Committee.
And as we continue the work towards this, I just want to mention that there is also the possibility that there may be multiple committees, and we're still kind of narrowing that down, and of course with the support of Roundtable members. Thanks very much, Avital. I'll turn it over to Amar.
Thank you, Sequoia. Thank you, Avital. I don't have much to add at this point. I think, Avital, you covered it on where we're at. Our three agencies are working together to kind of develop what the EAC would be responsible for. Some of the more recent discussions that we've had are what type of members we think would help our three agencies kind of define and structure some of our efforts. So we did mention the community engagement. I'm not sure how much our advisory members would really guide that, but really looking at kind of mentioning where Tamika said it earlier is like closing that loop and that feedback on how we work with community to make it more transparent and documenting those responses. Like, so we have actionable items to take back. So I think those are efforts that the EAC could really be supportive of all of our agencies, not necessarily just like the engagement portion. I think what we're also thinking about is participants. So we would kind of divide out how our members could support this work, and we're looking at a wide range. Some of that is that like our Native American community groups. We're thinking about maybe the NAC, the chair maybe would be a great person on the EAC. We're also looking at different types of groups, maybe youth-led groups or advocate groups, so that we have different voices within this EAC. But a lot of this is kind of in development, and I think we're still looking for feedback from this particular group on how that is going to be built out over the next couple of months. We're also looking at our timeline, what's going to work for all three agencies, especially with the amount of work that's coming online over the next couple of months. As you'll hear later, we're going to give an update on the listening sessions and the equity index. And so we want those particular outcomes and development to really be reviewed, have feedback and consideration from the EAC. So kind of just figuring out where that fits in our scope of work. So we don't, I don't think I have much more to offer besides kind of concurring with what Sequoia and Avital already mentioned.
Yeah, thank you both. And like I mentioned, we're just kind of getting this next segment of our roundtable presentations going. We'll also have in the next item more detailed explanation of our SB1 guidelines development process that we'll be seeking roundtable member participation in through volunteer process. And then we'll hear more from Caltrans. But was there anything else from either Avital or Amar before we move to roundtable member questions or comments? Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so yes, thanks again for joining this. I want to open it up now for roundtable member questions or comments on future opportunities for involvement in interagency equity initiatives. Okay, and there will be plenty more opportunities to discuss more in an applied format. So I also want to see if commissioners have any comments or questions on this tab. Okay, thank you. And now moving on to public comments. Are there any Spanish line comments?
There's no public comment in the Spanish line.
Okay. And are there any public comments from Justin's end?
Sequoia, I do not see any attendees indicating they wish to make public comment at this time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And again, this was more of an informational item for us to kind of tee up the next presentations where we have applied opportunities for roundtable members to support guidelines development, future equity advisory committee or committees, processes, and also Caltrans initiatives that were mentioned. So I will go ahead and finalize this. Thank you very much, Avital and Amar. And we'll move on to tab 6. Great, thanks. Tab 6 features a slide deck presentation from Matthew Yozgat, Deputy Director of Senate Bill 1 Programming with the Commission. Matthew will provide an update on the background of the SB1 programs and guidelines development process, as well as highlight opportunities for roundtable members to weigh in on potential changes to guidelines. Commission staff seek interested roundtable members to brainstorm recommendations and provide input towards commission staff related to proposed revisions to the commission's programming guidelines. With that, I'll turn it over to Matthew. Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Sequoia. And good afternoon, roundtable members, commissioners, and members of the public. And thank you to Sequoia and Laura Pennybaker for inviting me here today. I sincerely appreciate this opportunity to address each of you and share a bit of an update on our programs. I also appreciate the dialogue we had back during tab 4, and I think that a lot of that conversation will intersect with our programs. As Sequoia mentioned, my name is Matthew Yozgat, and I'm the Deputy Director of SB1 Programming at the California Transportation Commission. In this capacity, I oversee the programs at the Commission that were created by the passing of Senate Bill 1 back in 2017. I work with an amazing team of program managers and analysts and planning staff, and I'm pleased to contribute on their behalf through this presentation. We can go to the next slide, please. So this is a very simple slide, but it's also important because these are going to be the 3 programs that I'm focusing on in today's conversation. These are all SB1 programs, the Local Partnership Program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. We have another large SB1 program called the Local Streets and Roads Funding Program, which I'm not including as a part of this presentation, but this kind of sets the stage for some of the overview I'm about to provide. And we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the first program I'm going to highlight is the Local Partnership Program. The objective of the Local Partnership Program is to provide funding to counties, cities, transportation districts, and regional transportation agencies that have voter-approved taxes, tolls, or fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements, or that have imposed fees, which could include uniform developer fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements. This funding is meant to complement spending on transportation projects that these jurisdictions have committed to already. And going back to earlier comments about alphabet soup, I will apologize right now. I might throw out some terms or some phrases that we use a lot, but I can assure you, if there are any questions about anything I'm bringing up, we do have publicly posted guidelines, which are not super easy to follow, but I can also assure you my staff is always accessible and willing to help. So I will proceed on. The Local Partnership Program has an annual funding capacity of $200 million, which is broken down between 60% formula-driven amounts to eligible agencies, as well as 40% in competitive funding available to competitive applicants. And we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Applicant eligibility in this program is limited to cities, counties, or transportation districts with taxes, tolls, or fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements, which is similar to the objective of this program. The formulaic program is only eligible for those agencies that have voter-approved taxes, tolls, or fees. While the competitive program is eligible to that same group, but in addition to jurisdictions that have imposed taxes, tolls, or fees. The local partnership program has a very broad range of eligible project types, and you see some predominant ones that are listed here, which include improvements to road infrastructure, transit facilities, active transportation facilities, as well as the acquisition of buses, transit equipment, or rolling stock. Project planning, so anything that's pre-environmental phase, is not eligible, nor are transportation operations. Next slide, please. The next program I will highlight is the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. The objective of the Congested Corridors program is to fund projects designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation, community impacts, and provide environmental benefits. The Congested Corridors program has an annual funding capacity of $250 million, which is all competitive funding available to competitive applicants. Next slide, please. Thank you. Applicant eligibility is limited to regional transportation planning agencies, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans. In case anyone is unfamiliar with transportation planning agencies, we have a subsequent slide, which we won't go to quite yet, which will hopefully put them into perspective. The Congested Corridors program does have eligibility criteria, which states that each project submitted must be included in a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan and a regional transportation plan. For projects within the boundaries of a metropolitan planning organization, they must be consistent with an approved sustainable community strategy. Eligible projects are transformative ones, which are designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation improvements, community impacts, and provide environmental benefits. Again, very similar to the objective of this program. General purpose lanes are not eligible for funding in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, and that's a point that I want to highlight. We can move on to the next slide, please. I have a feeling this is going to be hard to see. The granular detail, as it looks very, very small on my screen, but we have included this Caltrans map of metropolitan planning organizations and regional transportation planning agencies to put a visual to which agencies these are. As you can see, or may not be able to see, most regional transportation planning agencies are made up of county boundaries, of which several counties can make up metropolitan planning organization boundaries. So going back to the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, each of the listed RTPAs, or regional transportation planning agencies on this map, are eligible to submit project applications in addition to Caltrans. And this map is, as I mentioned, a Caltrans map, and is included in the PowerPoint slide deck for this presentation. We can go to the next slide, please. And the last program I will highlight today is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. The objective of the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program is to fund public transportation infrastructure projects that have a high volume of freight movement and to support the goals of the National Highway Freight Program, the California Freight Mobility Plan, and guiding principles of the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. The Trade Corridor Enhancement Program has an annual funding capacity of roughly $400 million, which is broken up between state and federal funding. And all of this funding is competitive and available to competitive applicants. Next slide, please. Thank you. In order to apply to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, an application must be submitted by a city, a county, a metropolitan planning organization, a regional transportation planning agency, a port authority, a public construction authority, or Caltrans. So all public agencies. Furthermore, in order for applications to be eligible, For funding in this program, they must be in a regional transportation plan, and again, if within the boundaries of a metropolitan planning organization, consistent with an approved sustainable community strategy. Eligible projects are ones that enhance the freight system's economic activity or vitality, relieve congestion on the freight system, improve safety and resilience of the freight system, improve freight system infrastructure, implement technology or innovation to improve the freight system, or reduce or avoid its negative impacts, or reduce or avoid adverse community and/or environmental impacts of the freight system. So I kind of covered a lot there. I'm guessing we were taking questions or comments at the end of the presentation, Sequoia. So I can proceed. I haven't been following the chat in case there's anything in there. Okay, I'm seeing you shake your head, so I will continue.
I don't think there is, but yeah, we'll wait till the end to do public comment.
Thank you, Sequoia. So on this slide, each of the programs I just highlighted were established by Senate Bill 1, which is also known as the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. SB 1 provides the statutory foundation for each of these programs. SB 1 also tasks the California Transportation Commission with developing program policy for each of the programs through a public guidelines development process. Commission staff took this on for the first round of funding for each program back in 2018, which is immediately following the signing of the act in 2017. And this is the process we find ourselves in currently for this upcoming iteration of each of the Senate Bill 1 competitive programs. Each set of program guidelines governs how the programs are implemented, facilitated, and reported on, as well as how funds are distributed to reimburse agencies for expenditures. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now in each of these programs' third cycles, or upcoming third cycle, I should say, commission staff are holding roughly 7 to 8 public workshops per program to update guidelines with proposed guidelines changes to be delivered to the commission, or to be presented to the commission, I should say, by summer 2022. As I mentioned, guidelines updates are informed through our stakeholder engagement process. To this point, we have already held about 2 workshops for each program and anticipate holding roughly one workshop, per program on a monthly basis through March or April of 2022. So we find ourselves kind of at the start of the process, but with still some time to go. Once the commission approves guidelines revisions in late summer 2022, so after we present draft guidelines at one CTC meeting, we'll bring final guidelines to the subsequent CTC meeting. Those adopted guidelines will govern project selection and program implementation for the upcoming program cycles. Next slide, please. In this slide, I want to start highlighting several proposals that my team and I have for updates to be made in the program guidelines during the upcoming cycle. And I would like to highlight a few of those overarching themes here. So hopefully, as you all know, and Avital Barnea just mentioned, the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, also known as CAPTI, was published back in July 2021. There are several strategies included in the CAPTI which seek to update specific commission programs, and at the August commission meeting, commissioners adopted Resolution G2160, which directed staff to work towards updating the appropriate program guidelines to address implementing relevant commission-led CAPTI strategies. And at the Commission's August 24th All SB1 Competitive Program Workshop, which was our first kind of kickoff workshop, staff introduced each commission-led CAPTI strategy and explained how each strategy would be addressed at an upcoming program workshop. This is a commitment we've made for this guidelines development process. Additionally, our team will work to better integrate, a new proposal, or a separate proposal, I should say. Our team will work to better integrate equity into transportation programs and seek meaningful ways that it will factor into project selection. We understand that this is a very broad concept, especially stating it like that. But we are seeking real ways to augment existing evaluation criteria or consider a standalone equity evaluation criteria to further our program's consideration of transportation outcomes which are more equitable. This extremely important effort will involve close collaboration through our planning team here at the Commission, as well as our stakeholders, which includes Roundtable members. And we're also planning for an equity-focused program workshop, which will include all 3 of the programs I've been discussing, and we hope to announce that very shortly. For all 3 of the programs, we'll also offer the availability of the Performance Metrics Guidebook, which is an instructional guide for how applicants can calculate each of the required project performance metrics. Since cycle 1 of these programs, we've been collecting what we've referred to as project outcomes. Now we refer to them as performance metrics. And we've been kind of honing our request each cycle and will continue to do so. This guidebook was developed in partnership with Caltrans and regional subject matter experts through a collaborative working group, which has lasted about 7 months. While the guidebook doesn't require a specific methodology for calculating each performance metric, it is meant to point towards professionally used and easily accessible methodologies or modeling tools for agencies who either don't have access or resources for their own tools or would prefer to utilize something else, essentially. The release of the guidebook is the most comprehensive guide we've offered towards calculating project performance metrics, and we plan to revisit and update the guidebook with each subsequent program cycle. So it is a work in progress, and it always will continue to be. We'll be covering the guidebook in an upcoming workshop for each program as well. Next slide, please. In addition to the guidebook, program guidelines themselves, and so I know, again, two different things that kind of sound the same, but the program guidelines themselves will also request additional project information areas such as climate change resiliency and adaptation, accessibility, and public health. It is our desire to gather information from project applicants in these areas to inform our full understanding of projects and their impacts on surrounding communities. These areas are being developed and defined in collaboration with our planning team, Caltrans, and any additional stakeholders who wish to contribute suggestions. And as I mentioned, we will be bringing these ideas to upcoming workshops for public discussion and consideration. And lastly, I will highlight that I always have to caveat, there will be additional program-specific proposals as raised through the guidelines development process itself. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned in an earlier slide, we're very interested in Roundtable member feedback on any of the guideline proposals I've just mentioned or anything that I did not mention. We invite Roundtable member participation at our workshops or directly if that's preferable. And we can set up specific dialogues with interested Roundtable members and Commission staff to collaborate on program updates. So to elaborate on this, I will now turn it over to Sequoia to cover some additional information on this slide.
Thanks, Matthew. So as we mentioned in the last tab item, that we'll be seeking volunteer Roundtable member support in specific areas of our guidelines development. So this presentation is definitely part of that. So we are really seeking Roundtable members to help us engage with guidelines, brainstorming guidelines recommendations, providing input on proposed revisions to our programming guidelines, supporting efforts to improve equitable outcomes through guidelines development, which I know seems very broad, and we do really seek collaboration with you all. And as part of a longer term commitment, we'd really appreciate if Roundtable members, kind of as you are able to, support efforts over a longer time period, and so that may extend beyond the Roundtable meeting times and perhaps would be part of the tasks of the advisory committee or committees that we mentioned. And so we look forward to engaging with those of you who want to stay involved in this. I think there, as you know, per the conversation that we just witnessed, part of the accountability process being in sort of like these applied and very clear asks. And I think this is one of those that we hope to increase accountability through having participation at as early a stage as possible. So I will, in order to get a better sense of your interests, I'll follow up via email with Roundtable members to ask about your desire to participate. Quickly though, before I close out this item to discussion and comment, I wanted to mention that as we have seen that transportation funding is pretty complicated in our state, Commission staff have been working on providing an informal overview of transportation funding for our advocacy partners on November 5th. And that's next week, coming up quickly. But I want to extend the offer to Roundtable members and other advocates who may be listening into this meeting webcast and we would be happy to have you participate if you're interested. We will be following up with Roundtable members via email with details, but if you are an advocate listening in who would like to learn more, please feel free to paste your email in the questions tab, or you can email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov. Thanks again, Matthew, to you and your team for involving us in this important step of the state transportation funding process. With that, we'll turn it over to questions and comments. Roundtable members, do you have any questions or comments on this item? And please feel free to unmute and take yourself off camera if you would like. Okay, hearing that there are none from Roundtable members, I want to extend it to commissioners if you have questions or comments on this item. Okay, great. Thank you. Hearing that there are none, we'd like to gauge, since we're all on this line together, if after this presentation and learning a little bit more about our ask for involvement in SB1 guidelines development, if any of our Roundtable members are interested, and maybe you might chime in now if this seems like something that, yeah, you feel excited to dive into with us. Okay, we'll reach out over email and check again later. Moving on to the Spanish line. Are there any comments on the Spanish line from the public? Okay, she might not be there. I'll come back to it. Justin, are there any public comments?
Sequoia, I do not see any public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Going back to our Spanish translation line, are there any comments on that line? Okay, maybe she got cut off. I hope not. Maybe our admin team could look into that. Great. So before we close this out, one last, if roundtable members or commissioners have any other final comments or questions. Okay. Well, thanks again, Matthew, for joining us.
I appreciate the opportunity, and just in the instance that my presentation was a little maybe wooden or boring, I am sincere when I say my team and I are very interested to work with anyone who is interested in taking an active part in these programs. And I think the dialogue during Tab 4 was a very important dialogue. I know that plays into our programs here at the Commission, and you don't have to you don't have to take us up on this offer, but if you are interested to participate, obviously follow up with you, Sequoia, or any of my program managers that were listed in that slide. I know we would embrace the feedback, so thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so next we'll be, yes.
Sequoia, really quick, we do have an attendee who has now raised their hand indicating they wish to make a comment.
Oh, great.
So,
yes, please, go ahead.
All right, at this time we have Claudia Lindgren looking to make a comment.
Thank
Claudia,
you.
you're unmuted.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm actually the Spanish interpreter, and I was muted by the organizer. I wanted to let you know that there were no comments on the Spanish line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm glad that you were able to get unmuted. Very sorry.
Thank you, Sequoia.
Okay. All right. So I think we'll move on now to tab 7 for Caltrans Office of Race and Equity updates. Tab 7 will feature Caltrans Office of Race and Equity updates from Jeannie Ward-Waller, Caltrans Deputy Director of Modal Planning, and Amar Sid, Caltrans Race and Equity Program Manager. With that, I will turn it over to Jeannie and Amar.
Hi, everybody. This is Ahmad, and we don't have Jeannie anymore. She had to jump off, so I'll give the first part of the presentation, and then I'll hand it over to Carolyn Abrams, who's going to give an update on the listening sessions, and then also invite District 4 staff, that's Caltrans District 4 staff in the Bay Area, to join in on some comments and provide an update from what we heard on the last equity roundtable. So this part of the presentation is just to give folks online an update on what we're doing with the equity index. So if we can go to the next slide. So the Caltrans Office of Race and Equity, with support from the executive body at Caltrans, is developing an equity index, which we're calling the EQI for right now. This index is going to help most of Caltrans identify communities that we're calling equity priority populations that are defined as underserved or burdened by our transportation systems using environmental, accessibility, and socioeconomic factors to weigh the communities. And so we're also looking at how these indicators would visually display into a mapping system where we'll layer together and weight indicators, where we're going to produce an equity score that we can use to then, again, identify communities and then also position many of our programs so that we can prioritize projects for the equity-based communities. We want to make sure that we have a path forward within transportation to look at various indicators that have burdened communities so that we can start addressing those and mitigating harm. We're going to look at evaluating components that would be part of this effort. So we have this mapping and data system, and then also looking to build out different projects where we have different alternatives and different spaces to meet communities based off of the information that we're building out. This is in alignment with our strategic plan, where we released this earlier in the year, and we're looking at equity and livability as a priority for most of our work. With the equity index, this provides us an opportunity to look at who we need to engage with more, like where are we missing the mark with that engagement factor, and then how do we tie our projects back to that engagement need. So a holistic approach to this. What this indicator and this index is not going to do is provide us a modeling effort to really tease out how to address some of those burdens. Those are going to be the areas where we're going to work in tandem to look at different projects and programs to build out an analysis model for, again, different staff to evaluate this effort. We're calling this the Equity Index, as it is a 1.0 version. And so I'll get into a little bit more detail in a few minutes. Let's go to the next slide. We kicked off this effort holistically in June of this year. We have bi-monthly meetings with a larger group, and we also have a couple of different subcommittees within Caltrans. We have over 50 staff members that are participating at this point, and this is comprised of different groups from project delivery, project development, safety, planning, Division of Rail and Mass Transportation. We have administrative folks, we have public information resource folks on here, and then we have workforce development also part of this team. And so this collaborative effort is really looking at how this tool can be used not just within the context of my office, core, or in planning and modal under Jeannie Ward-Waller, but how can the whole transportation system utilize a model to look at different indicators of burden for our communities. Let's go to the next slide. So indicators that we're thinking about, we're going to position them around priority populations, again, the burdens, and then the benefits. So we're looking at this 1.0 model, very similar to CalEnviroScreen, if you're familiar with that. CalEnviroScreen is now on the 4.0 model, which just released a few weeks ago. We're starting with the 1.0, where we're looking at data sets that are already available that we can kind of house relatively quickly and build out a model that, again, is very specific to transportation. And so we're using available data from CalEnviroScreen, from the Healthy Place Index, from Transit Center, from their different transit dashboards that they have more recently. Some of our data sets are coming from the American Community Survey, as well as working with Esri in their Racial Equity and GIS Hub. This effort really is looking at, again, building out something that we don't have to kind of recreate the wheel, but we can prioritize it around the transportation indicators. Let's go to the next slide. So the group that's working on this, again, we have a larger task force that's meeting monthly. We started kind of doing a large data dump on where we're at, what kind of indicators we wanted to look at, what's available, and how it kind of pertains to transportation. And so right now we have an indicator tracker that is about 28 or so indicators that we're thinking about and providing justification for use or non-use. We're starting to kind of narrow this down to a smaller group, again, for this 1.0 model. And so you'll see here about 8 indicators or so, 11 indicators or so on where we're going to kind of prioritize a scoring mechanism for this. So we're looking at levels of poverty, we're looking at marginalized or non-white community members, we're looking at housing and transportation connection, the rate of some of the health indicators from CalEnviroScreen, like diesel particulate matter, prevalence of asthma, traffic density, noise from our freeway or arterial systems, and then traffic fatalities that Caltrans houses from our own data sets. As you can see here on the right-hand side, this is an image of CalEnviroScreen with just the poverty levels of percentiles. So when we're looking at our indicators, we're kind of thinking about how do we tie it back to the use of this model. And so if we're looking at the scoring system of having the indicators be grouped with that poverty burden, and then also the prevalence of marginalized communities, and then how do we move further into utilizing different health indicators or different transportation burdens for that weighted system. Let's go to the next slide. And so you'll see here, this is kind of where we're looking at on CalEnviroScreen. I'm pulling some of the indicators that really have an overlay of how our transportation system and redlining areas have implicated or impacted our communities more adversely. So this is just an imagery of different maps that are pulling some of the indicators that may be useful when we're building out this tool. You'll see this is the Los Angeles area, and again, how different sectors are really in parallel with our highway system. You'll see our asthma rate have higher prevalence around our freeway system, as well as the diesel particulate matter kind of along the corridors here. Let's go to the next slide. So with this development over the last couple of months, internally, we're pulling our own project data and project alignment information to build out different layers, again, with information that's already available. So in this slide, you'll see a depiction of our PIDS map, project initiation, developments, and documentation. And if you were able to zoom in, one area is kind of showing the rate of poverty by county, and the other is by transportation and commute with single occupancy vehicle. And so in an effort to kind of look at where our data is, we're pulling kind of all of our enterprise data governance into a kind of one body so that we can start housing and developing the indicators with project information that's readily available. So that's Caltrans information overlaying with the different indicators from some of the ones that we mentioned earlier, or kind of overlaying with CalEnviroScreen so that we can start looking at what an equity index for transportation might give us. Let's go to the next slide. Part of this effort, again, has to be rooted with that community engagement factor. When you're thinking about this type of tool for transportation use, especially for the State Department, we want to figure out a way to tie it back to community. So getting community support and understanding around the indicators is going to be very critical. We want to make sure that community has a really detailed understanding of why we are using certain indicators or why we may not be using indicators, and then also provide community a way to justify some of the indicators that they wanted to see be used in this tool. We want to make sure that in this community engagement aspect that we're kind of building it out into subsets, and so we're looking at honing in on relationship building with our state governments that are already utilizing different tools or have that experience with different tools for statewide programs. So engagement would include CalEnviroScreen folks that are working on the update for 4.0, or working with the Office of the Governor's Office of Planning, and then also looking at our health groups to see how we can maybe position some of the health indicators into the system. Some of the other engagement is our tribal communities. We want to be very specific on holding that importance of engaging with our tribal governments at a different level. And again, this is not going to be something that's a one size fits all. We understand that our tribal governments have different needs across the state and by our geographical boundaries. And then working with community-based organizations and the public. So these kind of efforts are around how we're going to divide up our engagement plan over the next 6 months. Let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, there you go, timeline. So in this timeline, you'll see here, we're kind of around an executive management review and update. So over the last month, we have been working with exec staff to see who's on board and assisting in the development. We have a lot of our exec members that are positioning staff to volunteer with the task force, as well as executive leadership that is sponsoring the development of this tool. Over the next few months, you will see that we're going to be going into that engagement aspect. So that's that external engagement that I mentioned on the last slide. And then looking at a way to kind of build out our use of a beta model that we can start looking at how this positions with projects that are going out for funding in the next couple of months throughout the spring and the summer. So we want to start piloting the EQI in the summer, and then have that 1.0 model be developed in the fall. Throughout this process, we're calling it a 1.0 so that things that we're starting to see right now, we're starting to position and kind of put placeholders on for a 2.0 model. So once we have the release for 1.0, we're already starting in the development of our 2.0 model to see how we can further link that modeling aspect of how we minimize that burden that we're finding through the indicators that we're seeing on the visuals. So let's go to the next slide. So that is the presentation on the equity index. I can pause here if there are any questions. See somebody coming online.
Hey, Mark, can I ask some questions?
Sure.
I saw one of the indicators being transportation commute indicator. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so one way we're trying to look at is the ownership of cars, if that's going to be coming into play here, and then also if we're looking at the length and distance from different kind of opportunity zones. That's one of the areas that we're trying to devise and how that works.
We have data on both of those?
Say that again?
We have data on both of those? I know I've seen statistics on access to a car, which seems to be incredibly inequitable. But I didn't know that we had data on commute times or
yeah, so we're trying to pull it for statewide. We do have some for regional efforts, and so that's kind of where we're at in the draft model, is how do we kind of meld all of our data sets together so that we're pulling it and having a more streamlined approach.
Yeah.
One of the efforts on thinking about the accessibility or the commute time, trying to make sure that our rural communities are identified in our equity-based like priority population. So when you think about CalEnviroScreen, for the most part, the disadvantaged communities that are identified are in the truncated area around Central Valley or around our portside communities. And many of our rural communities and tribal boundaries are left off based off of population. They don't meet the threshold for a disadvantaged community. Although from our community's perspective, there are a lot of inequities that are happening in those communities. They just can't show up on the map. And so when we're thinking about a transportation model, we want to look at different accessibility or different burdens that would show up so that we can start prioritizing our projects in a manner that's going to benefit community.
So I spend a lot of time on the development of CalEnviroScreen way back when, and accessibility to statewide data was a key criterion used as to what went into the first rendition of CalEnviroScreen 1.0. So that did limit what data could be used, because there were a lot of situations where they had regional data but not statewide data. So that I mean it's important that we use whatever statewide data we have, but also in the process identify if we have data needs, right? And so we can start working on that too, because as we've seen with CalEnviroScreen, we can get there eventually sometimes if we pursue the development of the data that we need and identify that early on in the process. Do we have some sort of a metric for the sort of, I mean, this is related the job housing balance. Is that one way to get to it? Do we have statewide data that can show, whether there is a balance between jobs and housing availability?
Yeah, we do have some data, and we're also looking at the types of jobs and the what folks may call higher paying jobs or lower paying jobs in relationship to transportation and housing. So where they may be situated. Again, there's a lot of regional data that we're trying to pull together for the statewide system. And so we mentioned Transit Center, which started doing a model of like how fast you can get to a particular location, and if those jobs are higher paying that are more conducive to the types of rent burden that's happening in the particular area.
So it's not necessarily mapped out fully for the entire state, but we're starting to pull different data sets where we can kind of meld them together. We're also looking at how you mentioned research and building out different metrics for this. So we have a couple of different research projects with educational institutions throughout the state for several indicators that might not be fully developed for the 1.0, but could come online for a 2.0 model.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any good data on access to public transportation and the quality of that public transportation?
Again, we have it for a large grouping of our geographical areas, but not streamlined statewide. And so that's another effort that I think is kind of where CalITP starts to come into this, and how we're pulling those GTF codes to see real-time and online accessibility. We're also looking at another tool that Sustainability Group is bringing on. It's more of an accessibility tool that may interface with this, so that, again, this might be a transportation equity tool, and there's an accessibility tool that have different meanings, and seeing how they could be utilized together.
So I'd make a recommendation when you do the presentation in the future, add a slide that says, you have the indicator slide, but add a slide that says, here are the indicators we would love to be able to use, but we don't necessarily have statewide data. And then I think we should also, through SB1, we're funding a lot of work at the UCs and the Cal States on research. So we should try to figure out how we might be able to use those research dollars to develop the data we need for this equity index. Walkability, do we have anything for any indicator for that? I guess we probably don't have a statewide one.
Not statewide at this time. But again, we have Sustainability Group who's pulling an accessibility type of methodology, and they have some information that I think is being used right now for active transportation to show the walkability.
And what about something like bike lanes per square mile or something? Do we have something like that? Bike lanes per, I don't know how you would do it, but it seems to me like maybe someone with a good way to take Google Maps data and crunch it and analyze it could give you, bike lanes per road mile or something, kind of an indicator. That might be helpful too, even if they're not all connected to each other like they need to be. And what about like VMT per square mile? Do we have something like that statewide?
That's something that I'm not sure if it's statewide that we have, and we do have a couple of different programs that are working on VMT metrics for a statewide use. So I'm not sure. I'll have to check back with our data folks to see where we're at on that.
I'm not sure how we actually use that in an equity index, but I think there's some way that we should probably start thinking about how VMT and equity can be used in an index. Last thing, I probably have recommended this before, but I don't remember if I did or not to you, but in terms of researchers, I don't know if you've talked to Manuel Pastor at USC, but this probably is squarely in his wheelhouse, and he would have a million ideas on how to get to this.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Professor Pastor on this particular project. We've talked with him on a couple of other ones. We are using some pretty awesome researchers for some of our indicator development right now. UCLA is kind of looking at a larger subset of those. One in particular is the engagement metrics, like how we would start documenting and measuring equitable engagement, so that we're having this component of an equity analysis from the tool, and how we're kind of going back to meeting needs from those equity engagement. So coming up with a baseline and then tracking that engagement over multiple years to see where we're moving with it.
This is great. I think that's a great idea, and I could see a lot of different researchers being really excited about the possibility of working on this stuff. So this equity index is going to be really important. Thank you for taking it on, and thank you for the progress you've made already, which is, it hasn't been that long and you're already showing progress. So that's encouraging. I'll let other people get back in now.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right. I just had a quick question and a great presentation so far. Kind of piggybacking off Joe's comments, because one thing I think we have to be careful on in terms of the right metrics, because the metric can only just give you one snapshot. And we also have to be careful what that snapshot represents. And I saw this full hand during the cap and trade conversations when at the time, and of course they rectified it since then, but they use like walk scores from, Zillow maps or stuff like that, where of course it's going to look better if you're in a walkable location that's desirable in some locations, because folks are trying to find a more affordable place to live that used to be in the suburbs. Now they're traveling farther out, and that walk score doesn't look as desirable. So you have to make sure we're in the metrics, we're telling the right story, and we're not just kind of looking into it in a bubble without that context, because that can almost throw the entire equity conversation out of whack as to why that is what it is. And I think that's very important. And I like the steps you guys have taken thus far to see, the appropriate mapping and kind of the right layering of what's going on in terms of the work that you're doing. So that's the first comment. Second comment, in terms of the academics, in terms of their research, I'm interested to hear what they say, but hopefully they won't be prescribing to us what exactly we need to do. And I'm saying that because I saw this happen as an example of how not to do equity. And I'm trying to remember, was that Metro or SCAG or one of this? Maybe been about 4 or 5 years back, where some academic research, I think it was from USC, I might be wrong, when he was first talking about equity, he's like, hey, but even at the very first conversation, oh, here's some examples of what we can do. And it's like, we haven't even had the conversation yet. And you're prescribing to us how to do things without us understanding what we need to do and what we need to talk about and how to get to that next level. So those are the only caveats I have. I think this is great work thus far, and continue great progress.
Yeah, thank you. Those are really good points. And I think we're being very cautious and very optimistic with our researchers. I think we have a really good team that has been really critical on how we're moving this forward, how it would be used, and how community can have a lot of ownership, because we want to also create it so that it's public facing and that communities can look at and identify the burdens within the particular areas. Are there any other questions before I hand it off to Carolyn to give us a listening session update? All right, thank you. I did take some notes from the comments and questions, and then we can kind of
I'm sorry, not about to I have a quick, it's Naila, I have a quick just comment. In the list of indicators, I agree with many of them that Commissioner Liu said. Can we also, is there possible to include something around like access to parks or green spaces, or like proximity to those? Because if we're talking about increasing mobility, we need to know it's not just about to businesses, but it's also about green spaces and all of that.
Yeah, I think that is a possibility. And I think one thing we're trying to do is in this update is kind of show you all where we're going. And when we get to that engagement platform, kind of showing like the larger picture of all of the indicators that we could potentially use, and the areas that we're kind of honing in on, and for very specific reasons to what transportation could benefit or burden. And I think those accessibility spaces to like green space or opportunity are some things that we're considering, but maybe it might be housed in another tool that would interface with this tool. But I think we do have the green space on our tracker, or public use space on our tracker, and when we're looking at like health relationships.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Randy, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Ahmed, for the presentation. That was excellent. Would you see value in and perhaps the staff consider this and including like a displacement vulnerability layer or component to this? I know the Urban Displacement Project, kind of housed at UC Berkeley, has done a lot of work on that issue, and I think that's something that we're at City CDC in San Diego, we're trying to get our hands more on that kind of data. In fact, we have a whole CARB-funded initiative that centers around that analysis. I wanted to see if the staff had considered that, and if not, would they be interested? If you'd be interested in considering.
Yeah, that is something that we are considering. It's kind of difficult to add it in. I think holistically for the state, but there's a couple of different things that we're pulling. There's some research that we have online looking at very specific to like highway design and the use of or the movement towards displacement or gentrification. So we are familiar with what CARB's research is kind of looking at for the displacement. I think we do have that on the tracker with a whole kind of host of research and potential data for certain urbanized areas. We're also trying to find a way to look at some of our areas that are generally not captured when we're talking about displacement. Another aspect is like how transit development or rail development might induce displacement or gentrification. Those are some of the other research areas that we're kind of looking at and see how that can be built out in this indicator. All right, so one of the reasons why we're presenting the equity index is we're hoping that the equity advisory committee would really support and be critical on all of the information that we're starting to kind of gather, and as we're building out the beta models to look at the use, to look at how we're weighing the indicators and how some of our mapping may change. So that's kind of the premise to teeing up this presentation. Definitely hope to have more discussion on future roundtables, and then as we build out the EAC, have a lot of collaboration and response there. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Carolyn so we can finish out this meeting.
Great, thanks, Amar. Good afternoon, everyone. So again, Carolyn Abrams, Priority Populations Program Manager with the Caltrans Office of Race and Equity. And I know many of you at this point are aware of the listening sessions that we're developing. So we wanted to take this opportunity to just provide a quick update on this work. I know we're really cutting it close on time, so I might need to skip through a few things just so that there's a time at the end to pass it over to our District 4 team as well. Next slide. Perfect, thank you. So as many of you know who have joined these meetings in the past, essentially Caltrans, CTC, and CalSTA are hosting 6 equity-focused community listening sessions that basically are really intended to center community members and residents. And so we're envisioning that these are going to be conducted in early 2022. They're currently planned to have a geographic focus. And essentially, we are trying to work with CBOs and other local government agencies to encourage participation from our priority populations. Next slide. So just to focus in on our upcoming tasks for November and December, as far as the timeline goes, we're currently developing a facilitation training for the agency representatives that plan to attend these sessions, and as well for the staff who are facilitating the dialogue in partnership with our ICF consultants. We're also in the process of identifying CBOs that we can subcontract with to essentially inform the outreach and engagement for the 6 sessions. And then once these CBOs are brought on, we'll begin these one-on-one meetings with them to inform the content and delivery of the sessions, and then also work on scheduling the listening sessions and conducting marketing and outreach. Next slide, please. So for those of you who have seen this list before, you'll notice that we've made some changes based on the feedback that we've received over the past couple months. So I want to just elevate some of these key changes to begin with. But the 6 locations, so for those of you that can see the slide, we're focusing in the East Bay on Richmond. In Kern County, we're looking at Arvin and Lamont. In Imperial Valley, Calexico and El Centro. In the Inland Empire, we're going to focus on the city of San Bernardino. And then for the LA Portside communities, we're going to focus on Wilmington. And then in Lake County, we'll probably focus on Lakeport and or Kelseyville. And then again, we're going to be encouraging participation from our priority populations. This includes BIPOC, youth and aging adults, our tribal governments and sovereign nations, people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and our housing advocates, and then people formerly incarcerated or system impacted. And I will mention that one population that isn't included here are people experiencing health disparities, and that's definitely wrapped in to these 6 locations based on the pollution burden that they face, and also health remains a key concern for our unsheltered communities as well. So I do want to mention some of the changes that we've made and the reasons for this in terms of the geographic locations. So you'll notice that with the exception of Lake County, all of these locations are designated as AB 617 communities, meaning that CARB has established community air monitoring and community emissions reduction programs based on the pollution burden that they face. And so we've opted to narrow down the list based on where Caltrans does not currently have ongoing engagement efforts. And we're recognizing the fact that 6 sessions is a very small number and we can only cover so much of the state in this process. So we're trying to not duplicate any efforts, and essentially if Caltrans is already doing engagement around another initiative in one of the communities that's been recommended, we've decided to focus our efforts elsewhere. So this is primarily the RAISE grant and some of the study efforts for the freeway sightings that are currently happening. So we removed Stockton and Sacramento, both of which are included in the freeway sighting efforts. We've also opted to remove Oakland based on the special studies efforts that are taking place around the 980. And then we've removed Selma and Fresno County, Southeast LA, and then San Diego Portside communities, since all of these are included in the RAISE grant. And I should mention that the RAISE grant is essentially a grant that's focused on reconnecting communities that have been divided by the construction of freeways. So again, we recognize that there could be a lot of communities on this list from an engagement and advocacy standpoint, but I do want to emphasize the fact that these listening sessions are just a starting point, and ideally we'd like to hold more sessions in the future to essentially establish communication and continue to build that trust with partners and community members. Next slide, please. So again, our ICF consulting team that we're working with and our staff in the core office are going to serve as facilitators. Currently, we're looking at having approximately 30 community members participate in each session. And then we are looking at having representatives from our 3 agencies to attend. And essentially, they'll be serving in a listening capacity just to observe, really demonstrate their commitment to this work. And then we're also considering inviting MPOs, TPAs, and other government officials to essentially view the session, but not be in the session, just to avoid creating an imbalance between the number of agency and government representatives that we have and the actual community members. So with that being said, we would conduct the session through WebEx, and then we would also have a YouTube live stream that would allow folks to tune in and take in the information. Next slide, please. I'll just keep moving right along in the interest of time. Oh, perfect. Okay, so I won't read off this entire list, but essentially, as mentioned before, we're planning to include executive leadership and staff members from our agencies in the listening sessions to essentially demonstrate commitment to this equity effort and give them an opportunity to really hear from the community members. So we know that not all of these individuals are going to be able to join each session, but it is a priority to our executive leadership and our 3 agencies to really have that presence there, so that we're not just communicating kind of up the line and just saying, well, this is what we heard and we'll tell you, so they can hear it firsthand. I'll keep moving right along. Next slide, please. So in addition to the actual 6 listening sessions, we're thinking that these are some of the opportunities for engagement. So as I mentioned, we'll partner with CBOs, so we'll be having one-on-one meetings with them. We're also going to be coordinating with the metropolitan planning organizations and the transportation planning authorities in these different areas. We'll be coordinating with our tribal governments, and this work, I'll note, is going to be informed by the core Native American Liaison Branch. We're also considering and exploring options for site visits that could be done in advance of the 6 listening sessions. We'll have the sessions themselves, and then we're also planning to do debriefs with the facilitators and the agency representatives at the beginning, midpoint, and conclusion of the listening sessions. Next slide. And this should be just about my last one. So I want to toss this out here that basically in the process of developing the listening sessions, our hope is that the roundtable can also help guide our work if members have the capacity to do so. So I'm essentially, I'll read through this really quick, but a few points that I've noted here that we could really use feedback on are identifying the CBOs that we should partner with, informing the purpose and approach that we use for the site visits, making sure that those are meaningful and intentional. Also the session content and delivery. We've also really been debating and kind of struggling with this issue of how many participants we have in the sessions. We want to make it an inclusive space, but we also don't want to get it to a point where, you know, we can't have a meaningful conversation. So we don't want it to turn into just public comment where everybody has like 1 to 2 minutes to speak. And then finally, thinking about beyond the listening sessions, how could we use this as an opportunity to guide some of our engagement on a larger platform? We don't really have time today, but our plan is to follow up with the roundtable members offline, really just to gauge interest in this work, gauge capacity. I know not everyone will have the ability to support these efforts, but if possible, we'd like to schedule some follow-up conversations with a subgroup of the roundtable to really discuss these points. And I apologize for really trying to rush through that, but with that, I am going to hand it over to our team from District 4, who's taking the lead on the Wood Street effort in response to the comments received at the last roundtable meeting. So next slide, please, and I will hand it off to Andrea Pugh, Cheryl Chambers, and Deborah Nelson.
Thank you, Carolyn. This is Andrea Pugh. I'm District 4 Equity Program Manager. And I just wanted to really just capture the listening session that we had on yesterday. And it wasn't a listening session, but it fell in the platform of the listening session. Ultimately, it surfaced from the last Equity Advisory Roundtable that was held. It was our Wood Street community shared with the roundtable that they wanted a listening session from District 4. It came from the Wood Street community and the unhoused and housed advocates and a request for the session. With that charge, we really want to uplift that framework and move forward and take a deeper dive in what that engagement will look like. With that, Caltrans District 4 hosted a pre-planning session. We leveraged the pre-planning session to really leverage an inclusive platform in the space of equity for the Wood Street community and the advocates. Their ask was to, be part of the process and hear what and uplift what this listening session would look like. And so we did that just from an inclusive space, but also from a space of equity. With that, some feedback that was shared in the this pre-planning session, because again, these are the things they want to listen to in the listening session. And what I will share later on is what we're identifying as a listening session. District 4 is looking at it more as an engagement session, because again, most folks want to be heard, but when you're engaging, you're listening, you're connecting, but also you're collaborating. And that is what the Wood Street community and most folks in this platform is looking to do from a space of equity. But some of the things that were shared during that conversation were the really expectation from Caltrans and what they'd like to hear and see and hear more about policy and resources and things of that magnitude. They wanted to partners to establish engagement before the problem occurred, provide employment services. And what I've identified, it goes more than to just the unsheltered piece and unhoused piece, but this looks like a wraparound service. They want representatives at these sessions that are just not from Caltrans, but gear from public health or the CHP or what have you, to really engage and to have a more collaborative and engaging effort. Another thing, more transparency and dialogue, equity and humanity, pre-planning for next session, commitments from Caltrans for institutional change, explain the leasing process. It went on to speak about health disparities, the impacts of quality of life, safety protocols, You know, a lot of folks spoke about the violence and things that are going on in that environment and within their community. But additionally, they really wanted to hear more about how decisions are made for relocation, air quality and engagement in California, and the plan of action. AB 617 came up to reduce the impacts of ignition in highway byways, focusing in West Oakland, but also best practices for removal of encampments. And to that point, we took that and said, okay, well, we got all that information, and our next step will be coming up in mid-November. We're going to hone in and call it an information session. The framework will, again, we went into a pre-planning session in the lens of leveraging an inclusive platform to really hone in and talk about things in the space of equity and allow the community and the partners to really speak what they want to hear and what the things that they want to see in these sessions. But the informational session will allow Caltrans and the members that are, you know, the executive board, the equity leads and what have you, to take part in that conversation and investigate those things. Additionally, give them the information, share the policy. You know, again, someone wanted to know about employee services. You know, we had a mass hiring event. We would share that information, what that resource looked like. Someone wanted to know the safety protocols, really hone in and get with legal and see what the safety protocols is from CHP so they'll know. They wanted to know the leasing process. Why is it that I've been here for 7 years and, you know, I'm told that I got to leave in 72 hours? So, you know, again, they want to know the process around the evictions and the removal of the encampment. And what the information session will do, and I'll recap, and I continue to hear this throughout the session. Information is key. People want to be informed and want to educate themselves. So that is the goal for the informational session. And with that, plummeting the informational session the next day, we would definitely go into what we call, instead of the listening session, we're looking into it, calling it an engagement session, as I mentioned earlier. And the engagement session is really, will hone in the Q&A to have engage in collaborative communication to drive equitable solutions with this community and as we move forward in this work. And I know we're right at time and I have so much more to share, but I will stop there and hand it back to you, Carolyn, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and I will just hand it right back to Sequoia. And of course, if there's room, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know we're short on time.
Yeah, we definitely have some space for comments and questions. We can start with roundtable members, and then we'll move to any commissioners who are still on the line, and then we'll move into public comment. So thanks to you both, or to all of you, for that informative presentation. Are there any questions or comments from roundtable members? I know there were a few questions in the chat.
And to respond, just to confirm your response, Sequoia, to Randy's question about compensation for CBOs, yes, we're absolutely compensating CBOs, so we have funding allocated for that, and we would basically enter into these subcontracts with them so that they can receive appropriate compensation for their time in supporting this effort.
And then there was a comment back on, I think it was still on the listening sessions from Leslie Sanders about tribal communities are mentioned, however, it feels as if they are mentioned only as a token recognition.
Yeah, I can respond to that. And thank you, Leslie. I think that's an important point to raise. I would definitely say that in our conversation about how we partner with CBOs and other community members, what we're debating is whether or not in our communication about these listening sessions, are we working with tribal governments as other government entities in the way that we would be working with the MPOs or the TPAs, and asking them if they want to kind of tune in so that they're clued into this effort, and or are we also engaging with them as a population that's of course impacted by our state transportation system, and bringing them in as participants to share their thoughts and their feedback and their experiences. And I think the answer is both. And as I mentioned, we want some of this work to be guided by our Native American liaison branch, just because they have some of those relationships already established. So we can determine, based on these 6 locations, which tribal communities we're partnering with, who we need to be in communication with, and also making sure that we're going through the proper channels to respect those routes of communication.
Thank you for your response. This is Leslie. And actually, my comment was made even prior to your presentation. It was for the previous one. However, throughout all of this, it seems as if tribal governments we're still missing the whole context of what a tribe is. And we're being left behind throughout all realms of transportation. And this is just more of the same. Yes, we're mentioned. However, we are not recognized as the community or as the government. We're kind of just in between. And especially for the rural tribes, Northern California tribes that I'm a part of, this second part, it's all Southern or Central California. So it's not even looking at any of the issues that focus Northern California tribes. And on the previous presentation, where my comment actually was directed, it showed that tribal communities were looked at. However, then I was trying to figure out where they were being put. Were they being put with the non-whites and Hispanic population? Because we're neither. And I think it's really important that the agencies start recognizing that they need to recognize Native Americans as Native Americans and not say, okay, we're going to work with tribal communities, however, then try and fit us in to the non-white, non-Hispanic label. If you're going to focus on tribal communities, and if you're going to discuss tribal communities, then give us the recognition and actually study. Don't try to lump us in with other ones. It will never work. It will never work.
Absolutely. And thank you, Leslie. I think, again, those are all really, really important points to elevate. And I know that in terms of our effort, at least with the listening sessions, I think we're absolutely open to any feedback that folks are able to provide. So if there are better ways that we can approach this work, whether it's in partnership with the tribal governments or with Native American communities, generally speaking. And I know you mentioned, to your point, that some of these areas, especially in Northern California, don't receive as much attention, and I completely agree. Our effort with identifying Lake County as one of our areas, or one of our focus areas, was definitely to try and capture a more rural area, and also Northern California, north meaning beyond, more than just like the Bay Area or Sacramento, actually Northern California. And I know that there are a lot of tribes that operate in that area, and so we're hoping to partner with those individuals as well.
Thank you.
And I just have a quick response from Amar. She's having technical difficulties, so she had to message me her response to that. Sorry about that. She's also agreeing that or the tribes are not being lumped together and trying to pull out tribes as a priority, as they are not done so in the CalEnviro screen application. And also, Leslie, we hope to work with you to do better on that, also within commission programs. So I would love to talk further with you about this.
I apologize. I've been having nothing but technical difficulties today as well as getting pulled off to deal with other issues. So I apologize as well.
No worries. I think we're all in this together today. A lot of us are having issues. Okay. Chair Norton, did you want to offer some comments or questions?
Yeah. I have a couple of questions, and then I just wanted to thank everyone for an extraordinary and enlightening meeting today. But I wanted to ask about follow-on metrics and to find out how you, after you engage communities and the projects are created, how you are tracking the success of a project and whether or not it really met all the goals that the community.
Oh dear. Maybe while we're
Basically, this is Tanisha, and maybe I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the California Transportation Commission. And I think what Commissioner Norton, Chair Norton was starting, it looks like she's back, was starting to say was that how do we really follow up to make sure that what we heard from the community, what we see in our projects is actually reflective of what we've been asked or what we've committed to in terms of building things or even planning things and programming money towards projects.
Sorry, I'm having.
okay. Seeing if Amar has a response for that as well.
Hi, I'm calling in on my phone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what is going on with the WebEx, but it's like cutting in and out. So hopefully I can respond. I think I'm hearing from CTC Commissioner Norton that you're asking about the engagement metrics and how we're going to be tracking that. And so that's what we're developing right now and looking at with several different research projects, as also kind of piloting with some of our programs on that tracking mechanism. I think the biggest thing is creating a baseline for the engagement model so that we're not just tracking like an increase in engagement, that we're actually trying to track it back to how it's going to be meaningful, if it's equitable or not, and how it changes maybe project development, program, and I guess plans and delivery. And so then having a mechanism to track it from the inception of all of our work through the outcomes.
Yeah, and I was asking, I hope my screen hasn't still frozen, but I was asking about outcome metrics and how you track once the community has been engaged and asking for things in certain ways, and to have these meaningful and safe new projects, what the outcome is as to how accessible they were and were the projects done in the ways that the communities had perceived. Sequoia, do you see that? Can you hear me?
You're cutting out pretty badly. Sorry. Maybe you could write it into the chat and we can read it out. Sorry about that.
I think that goes into along the lines of what we're kind of working on as Caltrans as a whole. So again, back back to kind of creating an engagement metrics for a baseline, and then seeing how that looks for if it is successful, or how do we determine as successful, and how that's kind of in relationship or grounded in community response. So that's kind of what we're working on right now.
Okay, thanks. We also have a question from Mitch Weiss. Is the compensation for CBOs that Carolyn mentioned being done directly by Caltrans, or is it through the contract with the listening session facilitator?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch, for asking. So just to clarify, the funding is allocated in our contract, and Amar, correct me if I'm wrong, but the subcontracts will be managed by Caltrans directly. If that, I don't know if that distinction matters to you necessarily, but it's a specific amount of funding that's allocated based on the contract, but then Caltrans will actually be managing those contracts with the CBOs, rather than the facilitator managing those contracts. Let me know if I've answered your question.
That is correct, Carolyn. So we're going to be doing the compensation through CBOs with something called the U10 process, so that Caltrans can have a little bit more flexibility in compensating the CBOs, I think, in a more timely manner than if it was going through a subcontracting process. And it's kind of the way this particular listening sessions was set up, because it's a CMAS. There actually wasn't a mechanism for subcontracting. So I think we're going to be okay with that U10 process. It's been successful in the past for some of the technical assistance that we used for disadvantaged communities, and in compensating their effort on some of the other programs we did.
Thank you. So we also have the chair's question. I got it sent to me. It's how are you keeping metrics about the outcomes of the community of the project tracked with community input? So tracking project outcome metrics.
I'm not sure how much else to offer. I think that's what we're developing.
Okay. Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from Roundtable members or commissioners before we go into public comment? All right, thank you. And I know a couple of our Roundtable members had to sign off, so we thank them for joining in today. Okay, so now I'll move into public comment. On the Spanish line, Claudia, are there any comments?
Yes, there are no comments on the Spanish line. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Justin, are there any public comments on this item?
Chloe, we do not have any public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for participating in this. And we have one more message from the chair that she'd like to add, that it's not just about engagement, it's about whether projects are being used in the ways that were envisioned. Okay, thank you to everyone for participating in that and for sharing that information. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more opportunities for information and for discussion. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to tab 9, meeting recap and excuse me, next steps. As we approach the final agenda item for the day, we want to extend our appreciation for the honest discussion and feedback that you've all shared today. In terms of major takeaways and action items, we have noted the following. We will continue to reflect on what was shared by our roundtable members in our conversation around accountability and transparency. Roundtable members raised the importance of governments acknowledging power dynamics, atoning for hurt and damage, democratizing language, and building relationships with community members. We will work with interested roundtable members to brainstorm and collaborate on specific projects, including recommendations for transportation funding program guidelines. And lastly, we will reflect on the feedback that roundtable members shared on the Equity Index tool, as well as the community listening sessions, and we will continue to provide updates on these topics. Do any roundtable members want to add anything else before we close our meeting, or commissioners? All right, hearing nothing. In terms of next steps, CTC staff will prepare summary notes from today's meeting. All materials and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Commission's website. The next roundtable meeting will be held in early 2022, and we will reach out to you all in the next couple of weeks to coordinate dates for the final 2 meetings. In the meantime, we'll reach out to roundtable members to follow up about staying involved in the various initiatives that were discussed at today's meeting. And one last request, there's any final comments from roundtable members, commissioners, or the public before we wrap up, or the Spanish line? Okay, hearing none, I want to thank everyone for their participation today, and your feedback and dialogue and really robust discussion. Look forward to meeting you all again in the new year, and thanks Stephanie for facilitating our dialogue. Really appreciate your leadership today. We look forward to seeing you soon. Have a safe and happy winter. We'll see you in 2022. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Sequoia.